awareness on the Trump administration's part.
All right, as we speak, Rosalind, there are sirens going off in Haifa in Israel right now. Let's listen to that for a bit, and then I'll come back to you in just a second. There you go, sirens live there from Haifa in Israel as the conflict between Iran and Israel continues in its third day now, and there have been attacks from both sides, and they are continuing today. What we understand right now, Roz, is that the Israelis have made clear that they want to see the U.S. fully involved in offensive operations against Iran. Is that being considered by the Trump administration?
I don't have clear insight into that, but I would say based on recent developments within the national security apparatus of the Trump administration, it's highly unlikely. And that's because Donald Trump campaigned on not getting the United States involved in other countries' conflicts. He wanted to basically ratchet down U.S. Military involvement around the world. And certainly his most vehement supporters would be very much opposed to such action. In fact, he got rid of his previous national security advisor because he discovered that Mr. Waltz had been engaging very privately with the Netanyahu government about ways to increase overt pressure and attacks on Iranian territory and assets. And that was something that Donald Trump did not want to do. So Mr. Waltz has been fired and has been replaced temporarily by the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. There also is not a sense in the United States writ large that the U.S. should be involved in any new conflicts. After 20 years of war in Iraq and Afghanistan, the United States public is very much war weary and would have a very difficult time mustering support for some sort of conflict.
Ross, thank you very much for that. That's Rosalind Jordan live for us there in Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, the UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer says Royal Air Force jets will be sent to the Middle East for contingency support as the situation between Iran and Israel escalates. Tehran has threatened to attack US, French and British bases if those countries help Israel against Iranian strikes. Rory Challenge is in London for us. So, Rory, tell us more about the UK's decision to send more assets to the region. Are we soon likely to see British jets helping Israel?
Well, we have seen that in the past, in previous bouts of violence attacks from Israel and retaliation from Iran. The UK has taken part, along with the United States, in assisting Israel in shooting down the missiles that were incoming. We understand that that hasn't taken place in this new eruption that's been going on for the last few days. And actually, when Keir Starmer was asked, as he flew from the UK over to Canada to take part in the G7 meeting that's going to be going on there, he was specifically asked by reporters whether the UK would be helping out Israel this time, and he very specifically did not give a yes or no answer to that. He purely said, these are obviously operational decisions and the situation's ongoing and developing, and therefore I'm not going to get into precise details. What he did say, though, was that the UK is moving air assets to bolster the air assets that it already has in the Middle East region. So that's going to be fast jets to the air bases that are out there that already have fast jets stationed there. And it's going to be more refueling planes to help what he calls contingency support in that region. Now, the UK is saying that it supports Israel, as he puts it, in its right to defend itself, and he says that the UK has concerns about Iran and its nuclear ambitions, but the UK's position officially on this is that this should be de-escalated as quickly as possible. And clearly, I think the UK is taking steps to prepare for any further escalation, but it wants this to go down, calm down as quickly as possible.
Rory, thank you for that. Rory Challenge live for us there in London. And just to remind you, if you're joining us on Al Jazeera, in the last few minutes, air raid sirens have sounded in Haifa, Israel. Also in Jerusalem, air raid sirens have sounded, warning residents to take shelter. This as Iran launches more missiles across Israel, across targets across Israel, including Haifa, as we've seen, but previously also in Tel Aviv. At least 8 people have been killed in the past 3 days. The attacks come after Israeli forces bombed civilian and energy infrastructure across Iran. And Israel has also issued threats for Iranians to evacuate if they're living near military facilities. The Israeli army recorded this message in Farsi.
This is an urgent warning to all individuals who are currently or will soon be inside or near military equipment, factories, and their supporting facilities in Iran. We respectfully request that you immediately evacuate these areas to protect your life and safety, and do not return to these locations until further notice. Your presence near this infrastructure puts your life at risk.
Well, let's speak to Ali Akbar Dareni about this. He's a researcher with the Center for Strategic Studies and is joining us from Tehran. We heard that threat there from the Israelis. How worried are Iranians at the moment?
Iranians are worried. Israel is trying to sell the fantasy of a nuclear program, a nuclear weapons program, attacking Iranian civilian areas and killing civilians and as well as military installations.
Yeah.
But look at what Israel is doing. Israel is bombing oil refineries, residential areas. Can you build a nuclear weapon with an oil refinery? Can you build a nuclear weapon with residential areas? No. Israel possesses weapons of mass destruction. Israel possesses nuclear weapons. Iran doesn't.
Right.
Yet Iran is the target of a war of aggression directly assisted by the United States. Now it has been proved that the United States had no intention of negotiating a deal with Iran. The United States has increased the shipment of weapons to Israel in recent weeks. It has directly assisted Israel in carrying out this attack. So this is an attack against Iran's existence, and it is aimed at a regime change, overthrowing the ruling establishment with the assumption that these attacks will create chaos. Iranians are going to protest against the government in the streets, and Iran will collapse from within.
I'm going to ask you about all of those points you make there. Let me just jump in just to ask you about something specifically about what the Israelis are doing right now. We are seeing an uptick clearly. First, there were the assassinations of Iranian figures, then the targeting of infrastructure like energy infrastructure, as we saw earlier, and now civilians being threatened, told to evacuate. Have all the red lines been crossed as far as Iran is concerned?
There is no red line left. Iran was forced to retaliate. Look at what Iran did last night. So after the Israelis attacked oil refinery in Tehran and Iran's economic infrastructure, Iran has started to retaliate. And the attack on Haifa last night is a glimpse of what happened and what is going to happen in the near future. So, but even more importantly, Israel has resorted to a dirty terrorist technique of smuggling mini drones and using infiltrators to detonate these armed mini drones in civilian areas in order to create chaos within Iran.
Right, and on that, precisely,
there has been a good progress
on that objective of creating chaos within Iran, as you say. We've heard Prime Minister Netanyahu, he's made it no secret that he wants regime change in Israel. He's urged Iranians to revolt against the regime. Is that resonating at all within Iran?
Exactly the opposite. The Israeli war of aggression against Iran has united the Iranians. Even Iranians who are opposed to the ruling system are now extremely angry that their country has been attacked by a foreign aggressor. So even those opposed to Iran's ruling system have united. I have rarely seen such a national unity in recent years. You know, it reminds me of the national unity when Iraq invaded Iran in the 80s. Saddam made a mistake. Now Israel has made a similar mistake. It assumed that Iran will collapse from within, but that is wishful thinking. Now Iran is now out of shock. The command and control structure is back to normal, and now Iran is determined to make Israel pay a price. This is very important.
Yeah, Mr. Delaney, let me ask you about the Americans, if I may. I mean, they were supposed to be talks with the Americans, the 6th round of nuclear talks with the U.S., which was due to be held in Oman today on Sunday. What would it take to get the Iranians back on to the negotiating table, or is that diplomatic avenue now completely closed?
The Americans were not honest. First, they said their red line is weaponization. Iran said, okay, we are open to a deal. We accept limitations on our enrichment program in return for the lifting of sanctions. There will be no weaponization, and we have a deal. But the Americans changed their position. They were influenced by the Israelis, and the Americans changed their position into zero enrichment. Zero enrichment means there is not going to be any deal. This is Israel's agenda for war, and the United States has embraced the Israeli war agenda. The Trump administration has fallen into this trap. So if the Americans wanted a deal, the deal was there. It could be achieved very quickly. But they changed their position, and now it has become clear that the Trump administration is an accomplice. Trump portrayed himself as president of peace. Now he's proving to be president of war.
Thank you so much for sharing your views with us. Ali Akbar Duraini, researcher with the Center for Strategic Studies in Tehran. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Israel's President Isaac Herzog has gone to the site of Iranian strikes in the coastal city of Bat Yam. He urged other countries to join Israel against Iran.
Tomorrow, the G7 summit will start, and I call upon the leadership of the free world. You really want to de-escalate? Then enable us and work with us to get the nukes out of Iran, the nuclear capability, the nuclear technology, its risk to the world, and of course its missile capability. And I trust fully the Israelis who are showing incredible resilience. I know my nation very well. We're a united nation, we're a strong nation, we have a strong army, and an incredible people.
Well, for more on the Israeli position, let's now speak to Menachem Klein, who's a professor of political science at Bar Ilan University, joining us from London. Thank you very much for your time. We heard the Israeli president there urging other countries to join Israel in its fight against Iran. Prime Minister Netanyahu has also signaled an expectation of U.S. backing. Right now, it hasn't happened fully. If Washington continues to withhold deeper military involvement, what are Netanyahu's political and military options then?
Good afternoon. Israel cannot accomplish its mission to destroy the Iranian nuclear project without the United States joining the bombardment inside Iran. Also, Israel cannot end the war without the United States building a compromise and a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. I think that, or as far as I understand, the Israeli leadership hopes for the first option. However, it will be better for all sides to choose the second option.
What exactly do you think the objectives are? What's your understanding of Prime Minister Netanyahu's political objective in this campaign against Iran? Is it deterrence? Is it degradation of Iran's nuclear capabilities? Or is it regime change?
It is a regime change. Netanyahu admitted this in a few speeches, a few addresses to the Israeli public, and it's cut and clear. Also, the scale of the Israeli operation shows that it's much beyond destroying the capabilities, the Iranian nuclear project capabilities and development. Israel hopes to topple down the regime. Israel wants to be the master and the policeman of the Middle East and be the sole state that has a nuclear weapon in the region. So this is the Israeli doctrine, and it goes back for many years. Here, Netanyahu also has a personal political target, political aim. He wants to cover his regime, his security regime failure of October 7 attack. He wants to cover the failure to achieve a total victory over Hamas in the Gaza Strip. So he has to move to Iran.
What about the Israeli public at large, Mr. Menahem Klein? Will they continue to support the government's campaigns? First it was Gaza, then we saw Lebanon, now it's Iran. But what we're seeing right now is an unprecedented scale of Iranian attacks on Israel, in Israel. Just a few minutes ago, sirens sounding again in Tel Aviv, in Haifa, in Jerusalem as well. How long will the Israeli public stay unified behind its government's military offensives?
Sure, indeed. My family now is in a shelter in Jerusalem. It depends. Let's look back to 82 Israeli invasion into Lebanon in order to change the regime in the country, and actually it was beyond this goal to change the whole Middle East. The Israeli public changed its support, moved from supporting Begin government to criticize and demanding stop the war when the cost of the war was too high. So much depends in the cost and the casualties that the Israeli civilians suffer in this war. This may change the support, the people's support for the government aim. At the moment, the Israeli public supports the government in big numbers, the Israeli army as well, and the criticism is not enough, it's not gaining enough momentum.
Thank you so much for speaking to us and bringing us the Israeli perspective there. Menahem Klein, Professor of Political Science at Bar Ilan University.
Thank you.
And our coverage of Israel and Iran and the conflict there will continue, as well as the rest of the day's news on Al Jazeera. But right now, we're going to take a short break and look at the world weather. Here's Everton Fox.
Hello, not much going on with the weather across the Middle East at the moment. Largely quiet and essentially dry. We do have a few showers just around the Caucasus, but otherwise it's really all about the heat. We're close to 50 Celsius for Baghdad, for Kuwait, well in the 40s there for Doha and also for Riyadh. Wind's just picking up a touch as we go on into Tuesday, so a little bit of lifted dust and sand, certainly a possibility at that stage. Meanwhile, we've got a brisk wind coming out of the Aegean, eastern side of the Mediterranean, but again largely dry, plenty of sunshine around, some showers up towards the Black Sea over the next couple of days, and nothing much changing here as we go on to Tuesday and Wednesday. A few showers too across the northwest of Africa over the next day or so, 1 or 2 showers just cropping up here, you notice, but otherwise it's largely dry with a good deal of sunshine. Meanwhile, plenty of showers there for West Africa, southern parts of Nigeria, pushing across into Ghana, Ivory Coast, all the way into Liberia, and just pushing up now into Senegal, heading towards the Gambia over the next day or so. 1 or 2 showers too, just around that eastern side of Africa, over towards Tanzania, towards Kenya. I'm pleased to say it's quieter and drier further south.
Everton, thank you very much. You're watching the News Hour on Al Jazeera. Still ahead, we're live in Gaza, where Israeli strikes have again targeted desperate Palestinians waiting to get food.
I'm John Hendren in Philadelphia, the birthplace of American democracy, where thousands of Americans have gathered to say no kings.
a former leader of a G7 country, how worried are you?
Facing realities.
What kind of leader would you like to see take the country forward after this interim period is over?
Not go back to the old fascist regime that we have.
Thought-provoking answers.
What exactly was the pressure? Who was it coming from? Were threats made?
Pro-Israel groups are very active in each country. This is no secret.
Hear their story on Talk to Al Jazeera. Investigative journalism.
We're in a hospital in the south of Lebanon, which is overwhelmed with patients. Israel has refused to withdraw despite a ceasefire agreement.
Global experts in discussion.
The American empire is over, and we are on a down.
Voices from different corners.
And you were beaten and tortured?
They come in, they pick you up and take you in for interrogations and beatings whenever they like.
Programs that open your eyes to an alternative view of the world today on Al Jazeera.
Explosions have been heard across the Iranian capital, Tehran, on Sunday. 2 fuel depots near the Iranian capital were damaged overnight. Israel has also hit the central city of Isfahan and the southern city of Shiraz. Iranian state media says more ballistic missiles have been launched from across Iran towards Israel. Air raid sirens have been heard in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has visited the site of search and rescue efforts in Bat Yam, where an Iranian missile struck overnight. He told people there Iran will pay a heavy price for civilian deaths. Now, countries around the world are also closely watching the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has threatened to close the critical waterway in the past. At its narrowest, it's about 33 kilometers wide, but shipping lanes are even narrower. Iran controls the north side of the strait and Oman controls the south. It's an important transit route for major energy-producing countries in the Gulf. An estimated 20% of the world's oil consumption is transported through the Strait of Hormuz. Closing it would force countries to seek costlier and longer means of transport and drive up prices. Let's speak to Doug Bandow about the latest developments. He's a senior fellow at the Cato Institute and is joining us from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for being with us. We've heard there about the consequences for the rest of the region and the world. What do you think are the likely military scenarios right now if both sides continue retaliatory strikes? Are we looking at a protracted, long-intensity conflict or something with the potential to spill into a broader regional war?
Well, at the moment, it's only between these two countries, and it could stay there. Iran is a large country, so there's an awful lot of territory for it to hide assets and to have its personnel spread. Israel is much smaller, in certain ways much more vulnerable. But Israel has apparently total air control over Iran, so it can strike almost at will. Both of these countries can do a lot of damage on each other. The danger here, frankly, is that Iran has much greater potential for spreading pain to the region by going after the oil production of neighboring states and by closing the Straits of Hormuz. So far, it's chosen not to do that, but feeling desperate enough, it could do so, and that really would spread the conflict widely.
Yeah. The intentions that the Israelis say, they've stated that what their intention is right now is to degrade and eliminate Iran's military capabilities as well as its ballistic missiles and nuclear facilities. How feasible is that, you think?
Well, they're degrading the missile capacity primarily by being targets of the missiles. So, that would be a curious strategy. They certainly want to degrade the nuclear capacity. The problem is the most important facilities are deeply buried, and Israel probably can't get them without U.S. support. So I think what Israel wants right now, frankly, is regime change. Okay. They would like to oust the current government.
Yeah. Doug, you mentioned U.S. support, and I wanted to ask you about that because various reports have suggested that the U.S. is debating direct participation in this war, in Israel's war against Iran. How likely is it that we could see U.S. forces directly involved in attacking Iranian assets and territory?
Well, the U.S. has been deeply involved so far, even though it has not been involved in the shooting. So the U.S. has backed Israel and helped protect it from Iranian attack. This would be a major policy change for the president.
Yeah.
He has indicated he doesn't want endless wars in the Middle East. A lot of his supporters are very skeptical of going in there to support what they see as Israel's war. If he does, I think it's going to cause real problems for his administration.
But it's a difficult balancing act for him, is it not? I mean, as you said, his supporters don't want another war in the Middle East, but there are sections of the Republican Party, the so-called neocons, who want to support Israel, who want to continue supporting Israel. How does he deal with that?
Well, it's very hard to split the difference. What he can say so far is that the U.S. has been supportive of Israel, but not directly involved. That's probably his best position, because neocons can be happy that he has helped Israel, but his own supporters can be pleased that he hasn't directly gotten involved in the fighting. If he sends in U.S. troops, or if he has the U.S. Air Force involved, and things go badly, it will be a very real problem for him. He is the president, of course, who criticized George W. Bush for the Iraq War. If things go bad for him, everyone's going to throw that back at him.
Thank you so much for your insight. Thank you for speaking to us. Doug Bandar from the Cato Institute joining us there from Washington.
Thank you.
Now, elsewhere, Israeli attacks are continuing in Gaza, where at least 37 Palestinians were killed on Sunday morning. 17 of the victims were trying to collect food aid. Hunger is driving people to the few food distribution points in Gaza, but Israeli gunfire is driving them back. Much of the remaining food distribution is carried out by the U.S. and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which has been accused of weaponizing aid. Let's get an update on the situation in Gaza and speak to our Hind al-Hudari, who's in Deir al-Balah, central Gaza. Hind, bring us up to speed with what's been happening, the latest Israeli attacks on Gaza and their aftermath.
Well, the latest airstrike was a graveyard in Nusayrat, where the Israeli forces launched a massive explosion against a graveyard in Nusayrat. And so the Israeli forces are not only targeting residential houses, public places, but they're even targeting graveyards where Palestinians are actually buried. Now, since the morning, there was also a couple of attacks in the north, in the south, in the middle area, in Al-Quraysh, and there was dozens of Palestinians that were injured and transferred here to Al-Aqsa Hospital. But most of those who were killed earlier today were Palestinians that were seeking for aid, Palestinians that went to different distribution points, one in the north in Zikim, the other one in Nitzarim, and the other one in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip. And all of these Palestinians were killed and shot as they were trying to collect whatever food they would collect. And this has been happening since the first day of these distribution points. Now, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation opens a couple of hours every day. They offer very limited number of food, and that's why Palestinians go there. This is the only way Palestinians are able to get food, because there are 0 distribution points other than this humanitarian foundation. Now, every time Palestinians start approaching this humanitarian foundation distribution points, Palestinians start collecting aid, and then the Israeli forces starts opening fire. Most of those who are injured in their chests, in their necks, in their heads, and most of their injuries are very, very critical. Doctors are saying it's more of a mission impossible to treat their wounds and to save their lives. We're talking about more than 3 months where no medicine or medical supplies have been entering the Gaza Strip. The number of trucks that are entering are very, very little. Palestinians are unable to purchase food, and the situation, the food situation, the health situation, and the humanitarian situation is deteriorating. All of this is happening as evacuation orders continue, and the Israeli airstrikes and artillery shelling continue across the Gaza Strip.
No, Hind, thank you so much for bringing us the latest there from Gaza. Hind al-Hudari, live in Deir al-Balah. In other world news, Ukrainian officials have confirmed the return of 1,200 soldiers' bodies from Russia. A series of handovers of the dead and prisoners of war who were injured, sick, and under the age of 25 was agreed in Istanbul earlier this month. Russian state media says it's handed back nearly 5,000 overall, but that Ukraine returned only 27 Russian bodies. Ukraine says it's returned 4,800 bodies. Let's get the latest with Asad Beg, who's in Kyiv for us. So bring us up to speed with these latest exchanges between Russia and Ukraine. Who's handed over how many bodies?
Well, there's been several exchanges. Today, Russia handed over 1,200 Ukrainian bodies, and they've said that Ukraine hasn't stuck to its side.
This is my reaction when I found out Fiber has 8 gig internet for $119.
Responding to those Russian claims, but we do know there have been a number of exchanges of dead bodies as well.
This is an area just outside of Tel Aviv that has been absolutely decimated by missiles that have come from Iran. Early this morning, you can see behind me first responders. They are trying to get the remains of the missile that landed there between two buildings.
Dead bodies. Now, Ukraine is saying that they have returned some bodies. Russia is saying that they've handed over 4,000 now. But President Zelensky says that he anticipates these swaps to continue until roughly around June the 20th or 21st. But for those Ukrainians here that are waiting for closure, some of these prisoners have been held by Russia since the start of the war. And as for the dead bodies handed over, well, before they get closure, Ukraine would have to carry out forensics, they say, to identify those bodies.
And what else has been happening in the battlefield, Assad?
The areas that they can't get to. Right now, they're trying to just...
Well, the drone and missile strikes have continued, nearly 200 overnight. Ukraine says that most of them intercepted, but in the Sumy region in the northeast of the country that neighbors Russia's Kursk region. Now, Kursk was where Ukraine mounted an incursion into. Russia managed to push the Ukrainian forces out, but following that, President Putin said that he wanted Russian forces to create a buffer zone. Now, President Zelensky has said there's around 53,000 Russian troops gathering in that Sumy direction, and fighting has been stopped to roughly 7 kilometers into the Sumy region. Now, we can't independently verify that, but what we can tell you is that Russian forces are roughly 18 to 20 kilometers away from the capital of Sumy region, which is also called Sumy, and that has been under constant drone and missile attack. And as the Russian forces get closer and closer, they will put more pressure on that capital of Sumy, moving more weaponry closer to that, and trying to carve out that so-called buffer zone to try and protect the areas or control the areas already under Russian control.
Assad, thank you for the update. That's Asad Beg in Kyiv for us. Still ahead on Al Jazeera, Donald Trump gets the military parade he's always wanted, and it comes on his birthday, but not everyone is happy about it.
In-depth analysis of the day's headlines.
Why is Musk deciding to go up against the U.S. president?
Informed opinions.
We are in times where resolutions, words, and positions matters not. France was shipping ammunition. The UK continues to send scraps of F-35s.
Critical debate.
The sanctions have failed to stop the war.
The problem is that quite a number of countries help Russia to bypass sanctions.
Inside Story on Al Jazeera.
Hard-hitting interviews.
As a former leader of a G7 country, how worried are you?
Facing realities.
What kind of leader would you like to see take the country forward after this interim period is over?
Not go back to the old fascist regime that we had.
Thought-provoking answers.
What exactly was the pressure? Who is it coming from? Were threats made?
Pro-Israel groups are very active in each country. This is no secret.
Hear their story on Talk to Al Jazeera.
As soon as the sun goes down, the shelling starts. Russia is a very challenging place to work from as a journalist. Even though the authorities here say you can't do it, it's not allowed, we are still pushing. We're always pushing our boundaries. Part of the center of Moscow is under a lockdown. People are being detained for peacefully marching here through the city center. We are the ones traveling the extra mile where other media don't go. We go there and we give them a chance to tell their story.
Watching Al Jazeera, a reminder of the latest on the Iran-Israel conflict. Explosions have been heard across the Iranian capital, Tehran, on Sunday. 2 fuel depots near Tehran were damaged overnight. Israel has also hit the central city of Isfahan and the southern city of Shiraz. Iranian state media says more ballistic missiles have been launched from across Iran towards Israel. Air raid sirens have been heard in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has visited the site of search and rescue efforts in Bat Yam, where an Iranian missile struck overnight. He told people there Iran will pay a heavy price for civilian deaths. Now, in the last few minutes, U.S. President Donald Trump has been speaking on his Truth Social website. He says that many calls and meetings have been taking place on the Iran-Israel conflict. He says that there will soon be peace between Israel and Iran. The U.S. president calling on the Iranians and Israelis to make a deal very soon. We'll have more on this in just a few minutes when we speak to our correspondent in Washington. Meanwhile, world leaders are gathering in the Canadian resort town of Banff for the G7 summit starting on Monday. The Iran-Israel conflict is going to be high on the agenda, no doubt. Our diplomatic editor, James Bates, has more from there.
The first of the G7 leaders to arrive in Canada is the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. He's announced that he's going to bolster his country's military resources in the Middle East. That's, I think, to protect the UK's presence in the region. It's not a very big presence, but they do have bases in quite a number of countries across the region. That, I think, shows you the big worry among the G7 countries, the worry that this could spread, that there could be further escalation. That's a worry about the military and political situation, but also, given that this is a place where the oil and gas reserves of the world are based, a worry about the effects on the global economy. You're not just going to have the leaders of the G7 here in the Canadian Rockies in the coming days, but also their invited guests. So there are 8 other countries coming, some of them unlike the European nations and the US, who have strongly condemned Israel's actions. For example, Brazil and South Africa. So a range of voices around the table. I think the one person everyone will be trying to influence is President Donald Trump, because he's the only player here at the meeting that could really change things on the ground, because Israel and Iran, of course, are both not here. But President Trump, if he wants, could exercise influence on Prime Minister Netanyahu. He could even, either privately or publicly, order him to stop the bombardment of Iran. Of course, the big question is, would the Israeli Prime Minister even listen to President Trump? James Bays, Al Jazeera, Banff in Canada.
Also in the news, there was an unusual sight on the streets of Washington, D.C. as U.S. tanks and military personnel marched through the city. The parade celebrated the 250th birthday of the U.S. Army, but it also fell on President Trump's 79th birthday. Patty Cohen reports in the U.S. Capitol.
This is the moment Donald Trump has waited to see for years. A U.S. military parade, the pomp and circumstance, the powerful weapons rolling past the White House.
Thank you to the greatest, fiercest, and bravest fighting force ever to stride the face of this earth, the United States Army.
It started in 2017 while watching the Bastille Day parade in France. Trump said America would top it. Now in his second term, this is what he does. Marching down 6,000 soldiers, military equipment, and dozens of tanks. On a hot day with storms in the forecast, the crowd appeared far smaller than was expected to celebrate the 250th founding of the U.S. Army. But critics say it's not a coincidence it's happening on the same day as the U.S. president's 79th birthday.
So really, I think we can look at this as more of a birthday parade. Despite the fact that Trump is a draft dodger, he certainly likes to surround himself with the trappings of the military. It aggrandizes his image.
His supporters disagree.
Well, it's not his fault that it's also aligning on the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army.
This is extremely unusual in the United States. Only the third parade of this kind. The first in 1865 after the Civil War. The second after the First Gulf War.
I was stationed all over the world as an Army soldier and civilian, Department of the Army civilian, and our Army participates in parades in countries all over the world. Why don't do it here?
One of the reasons this is a controversial parade is because of the cost, and it's coming at a time where the Trump administration is cutting federal jobs. They have plans to cut back jobs at the Veterans Affairs Department. They expect this will cost about $45 million, that's the estimate anyway, and about $16 million is expected to go to D.C. to help fix the streets because they simply were not built for tanks to roll on them.
A finale of fireworks to end the celebration, marking another year for the U.S. Army and the U.S. President. Patty Culhane, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Well, meanwhile, organizers say more than 1,000 protests took place in cities and towns across the U.S. on Saturday. Many demonstrators say they attended the rallies to protest against what they consider to be a dramatic overreach of presidential power. John Hendren reports from the demonstration in Philadelphia.
By the tens of thousands in the cradle of American democracy and across the U.S., marchers carried a message that sounded especially familiar in Philadelphia.
No kings! No kings!
Philadelphia's No Kings demonstration marked the flagship protest among what organizers say were 1,500 across the country against immigration raids, military troops in the streets of Los Angeles, and a dramatic, many marchers say draconian, expansion of the powers of the President of the United States.
We all need to raise our voices, and we need to speak what is right, what we know is truth. Tired of lies. Tired of lies.
The mile-and-a-half-long march wended past the Thinker at the Rodin Museum and a Revolutionary General George Washington to the steps of the Art Museum and a fighting Philadelphia underdog who battled against the odds, Rocky.
People need to be in motion and in action, and this is how America was founded. Look out there, that's how America was created.
In Philly, the demonstrations came with signs of the times and echoed local history.
It was here in Philadelphia that the Declaration of Independence was signed, separating Americans from the British King, George III. Now, once again, Americans who believe their democracy is in peril have gathered here on the steps of the Art Museum to say, no kings.
The national No Kings protests stretched across the U.S. In New York, actor Mark Ruffalo warned Americans will have to rescue themselves from Trump.
Literally together, we're the Avengers now. No one's gonna come and save us, man.
In Los Angeles, where Trump has installed National Guard troops and U.S. Marines over the objection of California's governor, tens of thousands joined the No Kings demonstration, continuing a sometimes tumultuous week-long struggle by the anti-Trump resistance.
Why are you taking all these Hispanic people when they didn't do anything wrong?
And in San Francisco, they spelled it out on the beach. From one American coast to the other, anti-Trump demonstrators countered a parade of presidential power with a procession of protests of their own. John Hendren, Al Jazeera, Philadelphia.
The bodies of the victims of Thursday's air crash in India are being handed over to their families. Family members have been seen carrying coffins into a crematorium. Authorities say they have DNA matches for 32 of the crash victims and that their families had been contacted. The London-bound Air India Boeing 787 struck a medical college hostel in a residential area after takeoff. At least 270 people on board and on the ground were killed. Police in the U.S. state of Minnesota are searching for a suspect who shot dead 2 Democratic politicians. Local authorities say Lance Bolter is a person of interest and is still at large. They say he was dressed as a police officer when he carried out the attack. Former House Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark were killed inside their home in what President Donald Trump says appears to have been a targeted attack. More on all the stories we're covering here on Al Jazeera on our website at aljazeera.com. The very latest on there on the Israel-Iran conflict, of course. I'll be back in just a few minutes with more on that story as we speak to our correspondents in Tehran and across the region. Do stay with us on Al Jazeera.
film industry in India's Kerala is booming, but behind the scenes, a dark truth unfolds.
Slowly, he started touching my hand and all. Then the whole thing was happened after.
101 East investigates revelations of rampant sexual harassment and meets the women speaking out. Breaking the silence on Al Jazeera.
ماتت ماما وبابا وخي حمود ماتوا أهلي ماتوا أهلي.
On counting the cost, the US and China have reached a framework deal to ease export controls. But who drove the hardest bargain? What's behind the rise of the Russian ruble, and at what cost to the economy? Plus, are the UK and other nations choosing warfare over welfare? Counting the cost on Al Jazeera.
Diomed from Venezuela was hoping by this
Who gives a crap? We make more than just toilet paper. We make change around the world. Watch our short film to learn how something as small as toilet paper can make a really big difference. Click impact at whogivesaCrap.org.
The US has definitively closed its border to them. The Venezuelan government only runs one repatriation flight from Mexico a month, and the waiting list for it runs, Mexican authorities told us, to 25,000 people.
There's more than 200 Venezuelans being accommodated right now in this government-run shelter in Mexico City while they wait for their chance to board a flight home.
I asked Adrian why he doesn't want to stay.
Mexico's treated me badly. I've been kidnapped, robbed and humiliated at work. They don't pay us properly.
Venezuela's in worse shape. Its economy remains in ruins. Its democracy too. But at least it's home.
Israel extends a state of emergency as more Iranian strikes target major cities following drone and missile attacks overnight. I'm Fuli Batiboye watching Al Jazeera live from Doha with continuing coverage of the Israel-Iran war. The Israelis are bombing Iran for a third day, targeting several sites across the country, including energy installations. U.S. President Donald Trump has issued a new warning to Tehran: do not hit American targets. And we'll be live in Gaza, where Israeli attacks have killed another 17 Palestinians who were waiting to receive food aid. In the past hour, Israel has sounded air raid sirens. Its military said Iran launched missiles into the country. It's the third day of hostilities as both countries traded strikes on Sunday. Israel's government has extended a state of emergency until the 30th of June. The sirens were heard in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Iranian missiles targeted multiple cities in Israel overnight, with Bat Yam being the hardest hit. Rescue teams continue to search for survivors in the Tel Aviv suburb. At least 14 Israelis have been killed in the past 3 days of conflict. In Iran, meanwhile, at least 80 people have been killed since Friday, and in the last few hours, several explosions have been reported across Tehran. 2 fuel depots near the Iranian capital were damaged overnight. Israel has also hit the central city of Isfahan and the southern city of Shiraz. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says Tehran is acting in self-defense and will de-escalate as soon as Israel stops its airstrikes. While President Masoud Pezeshkian says Iran's retaliation will become more decisive and severe if Israel continues its hostilities. Osama bin Javid has more.
Another morning of explosions across Iran, this one during rush hour in the central city of Isfahan. The provincial headquarters of the Ministry of Defense was struck by Israel. Plumes of smoke are rising from oil facilities in Shiraz and the capital, Tehran. It's day 3 of Israel's attacks. And Iran's top diplomat is warning of further retaliation if Israel doesn't stop.
نیروهای نظامی
رژیم صهیونیستی.
It is a response to the Israeli attacks and violations. Once these attacks stop, we will reciprocate. We were engaged in rounds of negotiations with the US. The sixth round of talks was supposed to be held in Oman. The Zionist entity is not willing to see us reaching an agreement or a diplomatic solution with the United States.
Overnight, Iran struck Israel with multiple waves of missiles and drones. There were several direct hits on the cities of Haifa and Tel Aviv. Israeli citizens were told to seek shelter through the night as Iran and Yemen responded to Israel's attacks. Israel's advanced air defense systems could not stop all the rockets and missiles. Many in Iran support the government's retaliatory strikes.
They used to call us terrorists. So what? Now even America and Britain should fear us. Let them be scared.
We are not really scared. We are more worried for our children. We belong to a generation of war. We are not scared of such incidents.
On Saturday, Israel launched more attacks targeting Iran's critical energy infrastructure. As night fell, an oil depot near the capital, Tehran, was hit and caught fire. Satellite images revealed the impact of Israel's earlier strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. As missiles continue to land in both countries, calls by international leaders for calm have not been able to halt the conflict. Sama Majaved, Al Jazeera.
Let's get an update on the situation now with Noor O'Day, who's joining us from Jordan, in Amman, Jordan. Noor is there because the Israeli government has banned Al Jazeera from reporting inside Israel and the occupied West Bank. Noor, tell us about what's been happening in Israel in this past hour.
Well, in the past hour, Foley, the sirens went off in the northern Israel areas, Tiberias and others. There were no reported impacts or injuries. The Israeli army says that it had spotted several Iranian missiles launched towards Israel, but we have not received reports of any impacts. Of course, this comes after quite a violent and difficult night of Iranian retaliatory strikes that where the rescue workers continue to work through the hours of the afternoon to clear the debris and make sure that there are no more casualties under the rubble, especially in Bat Yam, the district of Tel Aviv.
Thank you, Noor, for that. Noor O'Day in Amman, Jordan. And Tawhid Asadi has been following the latest developments in Tehran. He has this report.
With escalations ramping up to an unprecedented level, now we see continuation of trade of missiles between Iran and Israel here in Tehran. A few hours ago, we heard loud sounds of explosion from different parts and locations of the city, including northern parts, eastern parts, and western parts, in which we also see smokes arising from the different locations, showing that Israeli strikes are still there, and we're observing the air defense system of the country being activated to deal with this situation. And also, we've got this report coming from Talabani Street and Valia Square, which are there in the downtown on the attacks there. These places are critically important because they are close to very important governmental places. Also, we've got Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian today coming out with a statement saying that in case Israeli strikes continue, Iran is going to answer stronger and in a very decisive manner. Also, he criticized the United States for giving green light to the Israelis to go with these strikes, as well as other Western countries for providing the Israelis with military equipment to conduct these attacks. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi was also there to come out with a statement saying that Islamic countries could act together.
Maybe
to
you've seen them in
series
schools,
of violations
in the community.
by the Israelis.
You may have seen them
so
talking
far,
and
we are
laughing.
dealing with a highly escalated situation here in the capital and across the country as Iran continues to strike back Israeli territories. But how future could unfurl is something that remains to be seen, and we are closely following the developments in this regard. Tawhid Asadi, Al Jazeera, Tehran.
In the last few minutes, U.S. President Donald Trump has been posting on his social media website, Truth Social, saying Iran and Israel should make a deal and will make a deal, just like I got India and Pakistan to make, in that case, by using trade with the United States to bring reason, cohesion, and sanity into the talks. Likewise, we will have peace soon between Israel and Iran. Many calls and meetings now taking place. I do a lot and never get credit for anything he says, but that's okay. The people understand. Make the Middle East great again. Let's bring in Ross in Jordan in Washington, D.C. for more on this. President Trump saying there that many calls and meetings are taking place to de-escalate the situation. What more do we know about this, Ross?
Well, that's the first we're hearing of it, because the administration has not been willing to say publicly what it has been doing from a diplomatic standpoint. All we know is that in recent days, the U.S. did ratchet down its diplomatic presence in countries between Israel and Iran, anticipating that these airstrikes on Iranian military sites would be taking place. And we also know that the U.S. military did put its forces on a slightly higher alert posture, just in case things were to spiral out of control. That said, the U.S. government is not interested in seeing this conflict between Iran and Israel escalate. The State Department spokesperson, a State Department spokesperson, I should say, told reporters on Saturday that even though the Sunday talks in Oman between the U.S. and Iran were scrapped because of the ongoing conflict, the U.S. is still hopeful that these negotiations on Iran's nuclear program can continue and that the U.S. is prepared to engage.
What do we know about the current level of U.S. involvement in Israel's operations against Iran?
Well, according to reports, U.S. military personnel have assisted the Israelis in operating Patriot and THAAD anti-missile defense systems, but beyond that direct engagement, there has not been much in the way of actual U.S. military involvement. In fact, earlier on his social media platform, the U.S. president said that the U.S. is not actively involved in this conflict between Israel and Iran. Certainly, the U.S. is also keen to not get involved. It is something that Donald Trump had campaigned on during the 2024 campaign. And there is not great appetite here in the United States among the general public for any sort of new military intervention by the U.S. in any conflict, whether it's on Israel's behalf or any other country's behalf for that matter.
Thank you, Ross, for that. Rosalind Jordan live there in Washington, D.C. Now, Israel's President Isaac Herzog has gone to the site of Iranian strikes in Bat Yam. He urged other countries to join Israel against Iran.
Tomorrow, the G7 summit will start, and I call upon the leadership of the free world. You really want to de-escalate? Then enable us and work with us to get the nukes out of Iran, the nuclear capability, the nuclear technology, its risk to the world, and of course, its missile capability. And I trust fully the Israelis, who are showing incredible resilience. I know my nation very well. We're a united nation, we're a strong nation, we have a strong army, and an incredible people.
Let's discuss this further now with Menachem Klein, who's a professor emeritus of political science at Bar Ilan University and is joining us from London. The president we heard there, but also Prime Minister Netanyahu, signaling an expectation of U.S. backing in this campaign against Iran. But as we heard from our correspondent in Washington, there is no appetite for that in the Trump administration right now. If that doesn't happen, what will be the Netanyahu's government's next political or military options against Iran?
Good afternoon. It seems to me that the war will escalate. Sorry. Israel will escalate its attacks and in purpose to topple down the Iranian regime. I cannot see any other reason that leads Israel to attack so many different targets that are unrelated to the nuclear project.
What we've heard from the American president just a few minutes ago is that he is confident that he'll get the Israelis and Iranians to make a deal by using trade, which he says is what they did with Pakistan and India. The Americans clearly have leverage over Israel, but is the Netanyahu government right now willing to listen to the Americans?
Israel must listen to the United States administration. Israel has no other choice if the United States is determined. I doubt if President Trump knows what he is speaking about, fully acknowledge what he is speaking about, and the very fact that he does not dictate. Israel speaks million. He has to be very tough towards Israel, to dictate on it to stop the war, as did another Republican president in '56, Dwight Eisenhower, that imposed on Ben-Gurion to withdraw from the occupied Sinai Peninsula.
Given the unprecedented scale of Iranian attacks right now in Israel, we've heard sirens just an hour or so ago in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem. If this continues and escalates, as you fear, how unified will Israeli society continue to be behind its government's offensive against Iran?
For the time being, Israeli society stands behind the government. Even the opposition that criticized the Netanyahu coalition for many reasons, not for one reason, is behind the government, and is actually the Israeli society is drunk from the tactical achievement of the Israeli establishment, security establishment. The Israelis do not think strategically.
Did you know?
We're able to give our patients their permanent teeth the next day, in just 24 hours.
If the Israelis suffer much higher casualties inside Israel, the civil society, the civilians will suffer much more casualties. Then everything can change in a moment, in a day, or in a week.
Menachem Klein, thank you so much for speaking to us about this. Thank you for joining us from London.
Thank you.
Still ahead on Al Jazeera. We'll be taking at the day's other news, and protests grow in the U.S. against President Donald Trump's policies.
Hard-hitting interviews.
As a former leader of a G7 country, how worried are you?
Facing realities.
What kind of leader would you like to see take the country forward after this interim period is over?
Not go back to the old fascist regime that we had.
Thought-provoking answers.
What exactly was the pressure? Who was it coming from? Were threats made?
Pro-Israel groups are very active in each country. This is no secret.
Hear their story on Talk to Al Jazeera.
President Trump got the tariffs that he's dreamt about for years, but how will it affect America and the world? With renewed war in Gaza and instability spreading across the entire region, what are President Trump's true goals in the Middle East?
A quizzical look at U.S. politics. The bottom line.
Watching Al Jazeera with me, Fully Batibo. A reminder of our top story. Explosions have been heard across Iran's capital, Tehran, this Sunday. 2 fuel depots near Iran's capital were damaged overnight. Israel has also hit the central city of Isfahan and southern city of Shiraz. Iranian state media says more ballistic missiles have been launched from across Iran towards Israel. Air raid sirens have been heard in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has visited the site of search and rescue efforts in Bat Yam, where an Iranian missile struck overnight. He told people Iran will pay a heavy price for civilian deaths. Now, there's growing concern that these attacks between Iran and Israel could turn into a wider regional conflict. As that threat looms, let's take a closer look at the military might of both countries. Our defense editor Alex Katopoulos explains.
This phase of the conflict between Israel and Iran is being fought with specific weapons. Israel's main offensive capability is its air force of 340 combat-capable aircraft, made up of advanced F-15 and F-16 fighter planes and at least 45 F-35 Stealth jets. Aircraft firing air-launched missiles and dropping bunker-buster bombs have been the main weapons used. Israel says its special forces teams within Iran have also been launching explosive drones at targets, aiming to kill senior military leaders and other key figures and destroy air defense sites. Iran also has a missile and drone force. Despite dozens of drones being launched, they're easily being shot down by Israel's air defenses and squadrons of jets. But its missile force is large and powerful. Long-range cruise missiles like the Pave and Sumar have ranges up to 2,500 kilometers and can fly under radar cover. A large supply of modern solid-fueled missiles like the Sajil-2 means that they can be launched within minutes, making interception by Israeli fighter jets less likely. Although they're limited in number, Iran's hypersonic missiles like the Fateh-1 and Fateh-2 can travel up to 15 times the speed of sound, and that's 18,500 kilometers an hour. These missiles are the most likely to penetrate Israel's powerful air defense network. Israel said that the strikes are ongoing and they will not allow Iran to have the ability to make a nuclear weapon. But what hasn't been mentioned so far is Israel's own arsenal of at least 90 nuclear weapons and the long-range Jericho-3 ballistic missiles that would deliver them.
Elsewhere, Israeli attacks are continuing in Gaza, where at least 37 Palestinians were killed on Sunday morning. 17 of the victims were trying to collect food aid. Hunger is driving people to the few food distribution points in Gaza, but Israeli gunfire is driving them back. Much of the remaining food distribution is carried out by the US and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which has been accused of weaponizing aid. Let's get an update on the situation in Gaza and speak to our Hind Al-Hudari, who's in Deir Balah, central Gaza for us. Hind, bring us up to speed with what's been happening on the ground.
Well, in the past hour, there has been a couple of attacks on the middle area in Nusayrat, where the Israeli forces targeted one of the graveyards. Also, in Al-Bureij, there has been two different airstrikes on residential buildings, and there has been also a drone attack in Deir al-Balah. Some of those injured were transferred here to Al-Aqsa Hospital. Most of those injured were also children, as the Israeli forces have been targeting groups of Palestinians. But also, since the early hours of the morning, there has been continuous attacks in Khan Yunis, in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, and also in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, especially in Jabalia. But it's not only the continuous airstrikes, it's also the attacks that are happening against the Palestinians that are seeking aid in 3 different distribution points by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Palestinians, at least 17 Palestinians have been killed earlier today, and all of these Palestinians were seeking for aid and went very early in the morning to collect whatever food they could collect. We're also talking about dozens of those injured. Most of the injuries are in serious condition, where the Israeli forces have been targeting the upper bodies of the Palestinians, but Palestinians are saying that they do not have any choice. However, we're talking about nearly 3 months of no aid entering Gaza Strip. The number of trucks entering is very limited. Palestinians are starving, and that's why they are a drive to go to these humanitarian distribution points, despite the fact that it's weaponized and despite the fact that they are being shot by live ammunition and Israeli quadcopters.
Hind, thank you for the update. That's Hind Al-Hudari live from Gaza. Ukrainian officials have confirmed the return of 1,200 soldiers' bodies from Russia. A series of handovers of the dead and prisoners of war who were injured, sick, and under the age of 25 was agreed in Istanbul earlier this month. Russian state media says it's handed back nearly 5,000 overall, but that Ukraine returned only 27 Russian bodies.
Have you ever seen
Ukraine
the
says
magic
it's returned
glasses that can see clearly
4,800
without
bodies.
glasses? This glasses can not only see
Now to the
far
US,
away,
and there was
but
an
also
unusual
see
sight
near.
on the streets of Washington as tanks and military personnel marched through the city. The parade celebrated the 250th birthday of the US Army, but it also fell on President Trump's 79th birthday. Patty Cohen reports from Washington.
This is the moment Donald Trump has waited to see for years. A U.S. military parade, the pomp and circumstance, the powerful weapons rolling past the White House.
Thank you to the greatest, fiercest, and bravest fighting force ever to stride the face of this earth, the United States Army.
It started in 2017 while watching the Bastille Day parade in France. Trump said America would top it. Now in his second term, this is what he got. Marching bands, 6,000 soldiers, military equipment, and dozens of tanks. On a hot day with storms in the forecast, the crowd appeared far smaller than was expected to celebrate the 250th founding of the U.S. Army. But critics say it's not a coincidence it's happening on the same day as the U.S. President's 79th birthday.
So really, I think we can look at this as more of a birthday parade. Despite the fact that Trump is a draft dodger, he certainly likes to surround himself with the trappings of the military. It aggrandizes his image.
His supporters disagree.
Well, it's not his fault that it's also aligning on the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army.
This is extremely unusual in the United States. Only the third parade of this kind. The first in 1865 after the Civil War. The second after the First Gulf War.
I was stationed all over the world as an Army soldier and civilian, Department of the Army civilian, and our Army participates in parades in countries all over the world. Why don't do it here?
One of the reasons this is a controversial parade is because of the cost, and it's coming at a time where the Trump administration is cutting federal jobs. They have plans to cut back jobs at the Veterans Affairs Department. They expect this will cost about $45 million, that's the estimate anyway, and about $16 million is expected to go to D.C. to help fix the streets because they simply were not built for tanks to roll on them.
A finale of fireworks to end the celebration, marking another year for the U.S. Army and the U.S. President. Patty Culhane, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Meanwhile, tens of thousands of people have taken part in protests against President Trump and his policies. Called No Kings, the demonstrations were mostly peaceful, except in Los Angeles. Teresa Bo reports.
This is what the streets of downtown Los Angeles looked like on Saturday, as thousands of people took to the streets to demonstrate against the government of Donald Trump and the detention of undocumented immigrants in Southern California.
We are being silenced. This is the First Amendment right. These are people that have tried to get here for so long. They're trying to get a better opportunity for themselves and their families. And to see them being forcibly removed, it's not okay. It's not right.
The protest was mostly peaceful until the police started to force protesters out of the area with rubber bullets and tear gas. Last week, Trump deployed the National Guard and the Marines to Los Angeles, despite the opposition of California's Governor Gavin Newsom. Protesters say they do not want the armed forces on the streets.
People are saying that they're on the streets not only because they're protesting against what they say are Donald Trump's authoritarian ways, but also because the immigration rates that have been going, detaining undocumented immigrants in this country.
Many of those who came here say they're on the streets to raise their voice for their relatives who are in hiding and at risk of deportation.
The tear gas is for criminals, for people who are doing things wrong. They're using rubber bullets and gas, and they shouldn't. We want to raise our voice for those who can't.
In the evening, the Sheriff's Department declared an unlawful assembly in downtown LA, just as the curfew kicked in. People say they won't give in to the government's attempts to curtail dissent. Teresa Bo, Al Jazeera, Los Angeles.
Staying in the U.S., police in Minnesota are searching for a suspect who shot dead 2 Democratic politicians. Local authorities say Lance Bolter is a person of interest and is still at large. Former House Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark were killed inside their home. That's the news for now on Al Jazeera. That's it from me, Fully Bat Thibault. Sarah Hayrat will have a news hour for you in 30 minutes after Talk to Al Jazeera. Stay with us.
We're looking at some very heavy rain still in place across southern parts of China from what remains of what was Typhoon Wu Tip. That's going to continue, just pushing its way further northwards and eastwards, squeezing out as it does so. Here we go with our seasonal rains. The two merge together. Heavy rain there coming towards Shanghai then as we go through Monday, pushing out across the East China Sea, running towards southern parts of Japan, western areas too, seeing some lively showers. I think on the other side of the mountains, not too bad for Tokyo, and in fact it warms up further as we go through Tuesday. Hot sunshine by that stage as our system just tends to peter out somewhat. Hot enough too across the Korean Peninsula, northern and central parts of China at that stage, and plenty of showers just continuing across southernmost parts of China. Joining up with the showers that we have into Southeast Asia, more the way of showery rain just gathering across the Philippines as we go through Monday. Rash of showers there into Borneo, to Malaysia, pushing across into parts of Indonesia, easing up towards Thailand, seeing the usual heavy downpours. And of course, the heavy downpours coming in across Myanmar, Bangladesh, seeing some flooding concerns, some very wet weather to western parts of India over the next couple of days. It's still very hot for Pakistan.
The latest news as it breaks.
Police are here to disperse the crowd, but look, there is no crowd here because they've moved on, because they are trying to keep the police guessing where they're going to be next.
With detailed coverage.
The government says the economy is on the road to recovery, but people want to see their lives improve before they can believe that.
From around the world.
With the recent attacks, residents are concerned that the area is slowly receding back to normalcies.
Long after the bombs stop falling, the war goes on, beneath the soil. The world is littered with the remnants of conflict, landmines, cluster munitions, and unexploded devices that kill long after the fighting fades. The Halo Trust is on the front lines of this hidden war, clearing mines, restoring access, and reopening paths to life in places where even walking to school can risk death. But today, the challenges go far beyond the physical. In places like Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, Gaza, and Sudan, where the fighting may or may not have stopped. Landmines are at the surface of a deeper and more enduring power play.
Monday.com is the best AI for work, and here's why. Let me show you some of the mind-blowing things thousands of companies
to remove not just the weapons of war, but their legacy. James Cowan, CEO of the Halo Trust, talks to Al Jazeera.
James Cowan, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you, Nick. Good to be here.
So, after any peace deal is signed, the missiles, bombs and bullets, they may stop, but the weapons of war continue to kill and maim for years afterwards. Tell us a little bit about that, James, if you would, how the dreadful spectre of war still haunts long after any armistice has gone through.
Well, I run the Halo Trust, and the Halo Trust is the world's largest NGO that clears up after war. And our focus, we're famous for the clearance of landmines. And what landmines are, which makes them different from other weapons of war, is that a normal weapon will kill or maim in the moment. You fire a gun, it will hurt someone. But what a landmine is a weapon that is plastic, it's hermetically sealed, it's laid in the ground to kill or maim a soldier, but actually, when the fighting stops, it doesn't stand down. It's the eternal vigilant sentry. And it will, instead of killing soldiers, sadly, kill and maim innocent civilians, often children. and not years after the event, not even decades. It could be even a century after the event that they will still be lethal. So that is what marks them out as different, and why my charity is so focused on ridding the world of the scourge of landmines.
Right, and it's not just landmines, and to get an idea of just the kind of thing you're having to deal with, we can look at Syria as a case in point, and this is from the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, just very recently in the last month. They said that civilians displaced in their millions by the conflict are now returning to ruined villages, towns and cities that became the battlefields of the civil war. They're strewn with dangerous explosive devices ranging from grenades, improvised bombs and mortars to rockets, tripwires and missiles. An average of 6 children are now being killed by explosives every week. So making the land safe is what you're about.
Absolutely. We're famous for clearing landmines, but actually we tackle improvised explosive devices, booby traps, cluster munitions, artillery ammunition, airdrop bombs. We help control the uncontrolled flow of small arms and light weapons. You know, the world is afflicted by conflict, and the means by which conflict is waged is through these devices. So we are part of the solution. And the sooner we can get into a country like Syria, which is actually now a beacon of hope after a decade of war, we could help make it peaceful. You know, it used to be the breadbasket of the Middle East, but it can't if it can't grow the wheat necessary to sustain its own population and that of the broader region.
We'll get into that a little bit more in a moment. First, just tell us about the techniques of clearance and how things have changed over the years to where we are now.
Well, if you cast your mind back 80 plus years to the Second World War, which is when landmines first become used on a truly gigantic scale, the only tool available at the beginning of that war was the prodder, which was usually a bayonet. And a soldier would approach it on his hands and knees, and he would insert the bayonet into the sand, often if it was the Western Desert, and try and find the mine, and hope that he was not going to hit the mine on top. He'd come in at an oblique angle and find it.
Yeah, so he could easily trigger it.
He could easily trigger it, yeah. And things have come on hugely since then. First into metal detection, but most recently, of course, people who make landmines know that metal can be easily detected. So they are producing what are called either no metal or low metal content landmines. So there's a whole range of new technology. And the thing I am most excited about for my charity is embracing tech to find solutions to the problem of landmines. So ground penetrating radar, electromagnetic resonance, nuclear solutions that involve very clever detections based on nuclear technology, the use of drones, the use of open source satellite data, embracing machine learning, artificial intelligence. Instead of having to manually scan aerial photographs with a person expertly trying to find the landmines, the AI can search for the landmines and rapidly assess the scale of contamination.
But does it still take a human being to be able to diffuse that landmine and those devices?
Once you've done that survey, and of course a country like Syria needs resurveying. Qatar's just played a very full part in a conference in London on Sudan. Sudan needs resurveying. All its survey data has been destroyed in the fighting. So that survey bit is the first part. Then you come to the clearance bit. Now there is still a role for hands and knees demining detectors, handheld detectors, and humans doing this work. But if you can find the right environment, let's take the big open field systems of Syria or Ukraine, you can bring in mechanical assets. And that, if you can get that mechanical process right, you can greatly increase productivity.
So how would that work?
Well, you can armor up mechanical plants, you can have long-armed mechanical diggers, and you can therefore conduct clearance at far higher rates. You find them, you dig the mine out of the ground. If it explodes, it's harmless because it's in the bucket of a digger.
Done at a distance.
It's done at a distance.
Yeah.
And then we can then take rollers, we can take mine plows over land to show that the land is genuinely clear of devices. It's really important to finish the process with building confidence amongst the communities, because many communities are terrified of the land being contaminated. And even if you have cleared it to a very high standard, they may not believe that. So you need to show through demonstrations of mine plows rolling across the field that in fact the area is genuinely safe.
And I was reading recently of even rats being used, specially trained rats.
Yeah. So I think animals have a place, and I think actually dogs have a particularly useful place in urban clearance, because cities is actually more and more the place where wars are fought, and the problem there is it's instead of a two-dimensional problem, three-dimensional high-rise buildings, collapsed buildings. You're dealing with high levels of metal contamination, which confuses detectors. You have devices trapped beneath piles of concrete. So dogs have a fantastic way of finding things which other systems can't. I mean, the rats, they have their place. But to be honest, a rat may have a good nose, but it has no hands. And I'm yet to meet a rat that can dig a landmine out of the ground.
Now, what about the use of landmines in war? Given what you do, you yourself might have been expected to condemn outright Joe Biden's decision to send anti-personnel mines to Ukraine. But you didn't outright. Tell us why.
I think that we need to be pragmatic in this world. And we've got to work out
some dungeon entrances and top heroes are super sneaky.
And what
At Sentry Tower, most players just grab the chest and leave.
My organisation and others can help tackle the scourge of landmines. Now, if someone is going to use systems that don't stay in the ground forever, actually can be command detonated. In other words, they could be pre-programmed to have a shelf life, and as the conflict ends, or the local tactical need ends, they could be switched off with no harm to anyone. Then I think that's worth exploring. I think it's really important with any form of legislation, treaty, law, of which the Ottawa Landmine Ban Treaty is one very good example, is to keep it relevant for the age in which we live and not to hide behind nostalgia.
But isn't the only good choice ultimately not having any landmines at all?
I think that the inherent right to self-defense is important. I myself was a soldier. I believe in making countries and communities safe, but I'm not a pacifist. I do think that ultimately our democracies are best served by ensuring that autocracy cannot win.
Ukraine is now, I think, I'm right in saying, the most heavily mined country in the world. More than 2 million scattered across 40% of the country. You may have different figures, but it's pretty bad, isn't it? Just how long will it take to clear mines on that scale?
Well, let me give you some comparisons. The front line in Ukraine is about 1,000 kilometers long. The next largest minefield in the world was that dividing north from South Korea. It's only 178 kilometers long. The scale of the challenge in Ukraine is genuinely vast. And both sides, but the Russians in particular, have used landmines to defend from the other. And it is a war in which the industrial scale use of these systems is going to take a very long time to clear. But it's not all doom and gloom. Because of this huge focus I've been trying to make on technology, if we can take the suspect contamination, what we find over time is that there is generally an exaggeration about the scale of contamination. People put whole square kilometers as marked down as being contaminated, when in fact only a small part of it is. So if you can use artificial intelligence and survey to establish exactly where the mines are, you can reduce the suspect contamination area by 90% and save billions. And then if you can use mechanization rather than just humans to speed up the rate of clearance, and we are working with some fantastic donors. Let's take Howard Buffett, son of Warren Buffett. Howard Buffett is just an extraordinarily amazing man who is investing. He has a tremendous vision for the mechanization of landmine clearance in Ukraine, and his charity, his foundation, is making an exceptional difference in this world. So it is huge, but if we can crack the technology challenge, we can speed this up massively.
Right. And it's not just about making the land safe. it's also about restoring life afterwards, isn't it? Of bringing the communities back and enabling them to live as they were before. Right?
That's right, and that's what is so important. Statistically, the countries most likely to go into war are ones that have come out of war. And so if a country like Syria is kept fragile by the presence of landmines, there's a very real risk it will return to conflict. So if we can help that country, help stabilize it, help build schools, clear schools of landmines, clear hospitals of landmines, clear roads, then that country will become more peaceful and stable. There will then be economic investment. There will be a way forward. But with landmines, none of this can happen. You know, the absolute, imagine if in our country, in Britain, there were still landmines. No, you could not invest economically in a country that was contaminated in the way of Syria or Ukraine. So it is absolutely fundamental that if there is a peace deal in Ukraine or the peace endures in Syria, we can clear those landmines.
You mentioned your military career before this, and as you said, you led troops in Iraq and Afghanistan, and these are wars, of course, that left deep scars, as all wars do, on their societies, and now you're back there, not to fight, but to help rebuild, as we've just been discussing. Is that, I don't know, is that difficult to reconcile? I mean, how do you feel about going back to somewhere where you're talking to your enemies, especially people who were your enemies?
So I come from a tradition that believes that all wars end in negotiation, and politics takes over from conflict, and that wars all end, and you have to talk sometimes to people who were previously your enemies. And that actually is quite a cathartic thing. Many British soldiers, I think, are troubled by the Afghan conflict. They can't see how all that blood and treasure came to any good whatsoever. I can go back there. I have been back to Helmand where I fought, and I've met communities who've returned to their homes, who are desperate to farm the land, but don't know their own land because they were forced off it for 10 years. And they want us to find the landmines and stop their children being killed. And to be able to do that is, for me, hugely redemptive.
Of course.
And I think there is a future for Afghanistan. And it can be something that people who fought so hard to help that country can take hope for the future from.
What about that shift for you personally from soldier to humanitarian? What drove that? Was it out of necessity? You needed a job, I guess, after your military career, but was it also perhaps something about reflecting on your life as a soldier, or possibly even regret?
No, I had no regret. I thoroughly enjoyed my career. Actually, I left early. I didn't need to leave. I was asked to come and run Halo. So, and the reason why I jumped at the chance is because it's such an extraordinary organisation, and frankly, the skills you need to lead soldiers aren't very different. Soldiers are humans, and so the people who work for Halo, and to lead 12,000 incredibly brave people who get up every morning, are inspected to make sure their mine detector is working, that their visor and their body armour fits, and they head out into a minefield and they work incredibly hard in the heat, in the cold, to help their communities become free of the scourge of landmines. Right. That's a huge privilege for me.
To a layman, just the courage that must take seems extraordinary.
Well, and it's not courage I have to show. I'm merely the guy in charge.
No, but from the point of view of those guys who are doing it.
I'd like to salute them and their courage, because the men and women who work for the Halo Trust are doing extraordinary work in this world. And they do it for really, they cost Western governments very, very little. We have an amazing range of donors, often private philanthropists now, who see the value of what we do. And I think we represent extraordinary value for money, because we're able to sustain 12,000 men and women across the world in 32 conflict-affected states for really a very little money at all. And I think it's something that I'm proud of my D-miners, and I would hope that the general public would be too.
You've talked about the conflicts that are ongoing: Yemen, Iraq, Syria, Palestine, Ukraine. You, in the past, have described these as post-war minefields in the figurative sense and in the literal sense. And of course, in all those situations, you need political support from within. But I imagine that's not always that straightforward, and that must be a significant part of your job.
It is. And I think, though, this is a challenge we can meet, because I think the humanitarian paradigm of the 1990s through to really 2010 is shifting. And the aim of that era was to lift people from poverty. And what our governments want now is something different. And so the United States' decision to cut foreign assistance could have been extremely harmful to my organization, but actually the United States recognizes the value of our work, because we help make America safer, we help make America stronger, actually we help make America wealthier. And so the United States is not cutting our funding and is continuing to support our work. So we can make the case as to why our work matters beyond just the humanitarian, although saving life is absolutely vital. But if we can make a country stable, if we can make it peaceful, then it won't be a threat. Let's take migration. People worry about migration hugely, but Halo, for only £3 million a year from the British government, is keeping 4 million people in safe and gainful employment in Afghanistan. They don't want to migrate. Why would you want to migrate if you're happy and safe in your own country?
Because you've cleared the land and enabled them to work.
Afghanistan is a desert, but it is also incredibly fertile. And the reason why it's fertile is because of the meltwater from the Hindu Kush and the irrigation system that enables that. We've cleared that irrigation system, and we have plans to make another 6 million people safe in Afghanistan.
What about Gaza, the situation there? I mean, we talk about the political difficulties of an area of conflict, but how do you view the ongoing threat from hidden ordnance in Gaza, which is whenever that finally comes to an end, that conflict is going to be a colossal issue?
Well, we have spent the last 10 years working in, as I mentioned, countries like Syria and Iraq. We have grown a particular expertise in urban clearance. Now, whichever side of the argument you lie on, and some people are incredibly passionate in favor of Israel, some people are incredibly passionate in favor of Palestine. We sit very much neutral on this subject. We are not here to help any individual group. We're here to help people. And there are 2.2 million people there who need help. And that doesn't just help the people who live in Gaza, it also helps keep Israel safe. So we can make a very clear case as to the value of our work and maintain very strict neutrality.
You've seen the terror of war, as I say, from both sides of the conflict, before, while the conflict's going on, and post-conflict, and you've called now the most dangerous time in decades. How do you view this time of polarization, of saber rattling of these growing conflicts around the world?
So I think it's a time for our leaders to rediscover.
When it comes to dental implants, Nuvia is the clear choice. Nuvia delivers a strong, permanent solution in just 24 hours. No annoying extra visits or wasted time driving back and forth to the dentist. With Nuvia, you get something
needs to be avoided, because the world is out there. The world will not ignore us, and we cannot ignore it. And for the really very small amounts of money spent on overseas development, these cuts that countries like the British are currently implementing are, in my view, actually ultimately counterproductive. We will be wealthier, we will be safer, we will be stronger if we continue to have the confidence to play our part in the world. And I would strongly encourage the United Kingdom, the countries of the European Union, and other Western democracies to step up and play their part. And what's so lovely to be here in Qatar and see the Qataris do this, I think that's an example that countries in the West should follow.
Are you worried about how fast the world seems to be rearming?
I think that a stable world is in part based on responsible defence. The word is defence, not war. We used to call, in Britain, we used to talk about the War Office, and we now talk about the Ministry of Defence. And I think that democracy does rely on responsible defence, and I have no objection to that whatsoever.
So you've worn the uniform of a very senior officer in the military, and now the vest of a humanitarian, if I may put it that way. In that latter role, I guess you must reflect about humanity and this perpetual cycle of conflict that someone somewhere is always mired in. Do you have any particular reflections about that, about the way the world is going and humanity is faced with these ongoing problems of ending conflict?
It's often put to me that moving from a military life to a humanitarian life is a complete volte-face. In some way, it's a contradiction. I don't see it that way at all. I see it actually as two sides of the same coin. I think that if you're going to ameliorate the consequences of conflict, you need to be militarily literate. You need to understand how war really works. And I think I do know enough, sadly, as to why that is. And I think it's helpful to have people who can be militarily, strategically literate when we're trying to come to conclusions. It's easy to be extremely well-intentioned, but ultimately your work is fruitless unless you can root it within a broader strategic intent. And I think one of the things I'm very passionate about is actually not separating out defence, diplomacy and development, the 3 Ds that most countries look at, but actually looking at them as a nexus, bringing them together and finding ways of making the world better through the integrated, not the separated approach to foreign policy.
And there's so many arenas where that counts, and not least climate change.
Precisely. I mean, let's take Angola. We have a very large program in Angola. Few people know this, but if you're British, you know that the biggest tank battle ever fought in Africa was the Battle of Alabama. But few people know that the second biggest tank battle fought in Africa was in Angola, the Battle of Cuitacanaval. And it involved not only the use of tanks, but the massive use of anti-tank mines and anti-personnel mines. And those mines, unlike the tanks, have not gone away. What's happened is those communities are cut off, and those communities have resorted in their desperation and their poverty to poaching, to slash and burn farming. And Angola is the source, the headwaters of the river system that feeds the Okavango Delta. And it is the 5th largest carbon sink on the planet. Now, if the scale of destruction and deforestation continues, then not only will the whole of Southwest Africa suffer, but the world will as well. So there is an absolute correlation between conflict and climate. And the Halo Trust is now working with the Angolan government to clear those minefields. We're working with other partners in the conservation world to establish really effective national parks and to reverse this really alarming prospect of the collapse of nature in southern Africa.
It's a clarion call, isn't it? A crucial, critical clarion call. But is anybody listening?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think people are, and I think there's some very visionary donors who can see the value of what we're doing. So I think the world is not lost. I don't do this work out of a sense of pessimism. I'm ultimately an optimist, and I'm very passionate about conservation and climate issues. And I do think that this example of what we're doing in Angola is but one. I mean, I could talk about Somalia, or I could talk about other parts of the world as well. So this is fundamental to what I hope for the Halo Trust.
When, if you finally decide to retire altogether, what will you draw on most in your long and distinctly varied career and this orbit of your working life?
I think the theme that draws my career, and I joined the army in 1982 as a private soldier in Northern Ireland. I watched that conflict end in negotiation, is that all wars end ultimately. And I have seen the wars in the Balkans, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan. I'm watching the war in Ukraine. All wars come to an end eventually, and it's really about what follows, what sort of responsible peace that we as the international community can deliver that matters to stop a return to conflict at a later date.
And for that, we need responsible leaders.
Yes, and we need to refine that confidence I talked about earlier. I worry that many of our leaders in the West are drawn to their domestic concerns and preoccupations and are not looking outside enough to their role as statesmen and not just domestic politicians.
Finally, James, if you look back on this latter part of your career with the Halo Trust and looking at all the work that the Halo Trust does, can you just give us one final example, an inspiring example, if you like, that depicts for you exactly what you do and why you do it?
I could talk extensively about the big statistics, but I think you need to humanize this. And I remember going to a school in Zimbabwe, and it was a little classroom, little wooden desks, and there's a teacher, a young man teaching the class. And as I walk in, he's asked them a question, and I couldn't quite catch what the question was. But I asked afterwards. He'd not said, you know, what's the capital of Zimbabwe or what's 2 + 2. He'd said to the children, all of whom had raised their hands, how many of you walked to school today through a minefield? And I think my job is to make sure that no one in this world has to put their hand up in answer to that question.
James Cowan, thank you very much for talking about it.
The film industry in India's Kerala is booming, but behind the scenes, a dark truth unfolds.
Slowly, he started touching my hand and all. Then the whole thing was happened after.
101 East investigates revelations of rampant sexual harassment and meets the women speaking out, breaking the silence on Al Jazeera.
We will not allow federal agents to be attacked, and we will not allow an American city to be invaded and conquered by a foreign enemy.
The administration of Donald Trump is determined to carry out its signature initiative, rounding up and deporting undocumented workers and migrants.
A very peaceful protest ongoing a few blocks away from where we are. We're being asked to leave by the police. We're going. Listen, you don't have to threaten us. We're fine. We're just doing our work. We're just doing our work.
The sun may have faded, but the anger against Donald Trump, against ICE, only growing. And nobody knows how much longer this will go on.
In-depth analysis of the day's headlines.
Why is Musk deciding to go up against the U.S. president?
Informed opinions.
We are in times where resolutions, words, and positions matters not. France was shipping ammunition. The UK continues to send scraps of F-35s.
Critical debate.
The sanctions have failed to stop the war.
The problem is that quite a number of countries help Russia to bypass sanctions.
Inside Story on Al Jazeera.
What happens in New York has implications all around the world. To make these stories resonate requires talking to everyday people.
The mayor of the city announced that he was doing away with the curfew that was supposed to get everybody off the street.
It's international perspective with the human touch, zooming way in and then pulling back out again.
And the focus of this news hour, the escalating conflict between Israel and Iran. Coming up. Explosions across Tehran. Israel bombs government buildings. Several Iranian cities are hit. Sounds of sirens in Israel. Iran's retaliatory attacks kill at least 14 people, hundreds are injured. Iran's foreign minister accuses Israel of starting the conflict to prevent a nuclear deal with the United States. And Israel's bombardment of Gaza still continues. At least 37 Palestinians have been killed, several while trying to collect food aid. The conflict between Iran and Israel appears to be getting worse and also more intense now. Both sides are hitting each other with waves of missiles and drones after Israel triggered the conflict on Friday. Air raid sirens have been heard across Israel. Its military says that Iran launched more missiles towards its territory. They targeted multiple cities on Saturday night, with Bat Yam being hit the hardest. Now, rescue teams continue to search for survivors in the Tel Aviv suburb. At least 14 Israelis have been killed in the last 3 days of conflict. It's the third day of hostilities, with both sides trading strikes.
It's a great place to start and a great place to finish.
Find your place
There were also
at
explosions in the
RTC.
Iranian capital throughout the day. A number of strikes hit central Tehran, including near government buildings. Israel says it struck the Defense Ministry tower. Iran's intelligence agency says it's arrested 2 people accused out of carrying acts of sabotage in the country. Now, at least 110 people have been killed in Iran since Friday. Roads in the capital have been clogged with traffic as people try to leave Tehran. The road connecting the city to northern Iran is particularly busy, and there's been an increase in strikes on the capital on Sunday, and residential buildings haven't been spared. And take a look at this, because this is the Google map of traffic in Iran. All those red lines show how heavy congestion on highways and road arteries connecting the capital is. Now, we have several correspondents covering this fast-moving story for us. In a moment, we'll be speaking to Rosalind Jordan, who's live in Washington, D.C., Noor Adey, who's standing by for us in Amman in Jordan, and Tahed Asadi is in Tehran. But first, let's listen to this report from Osama bin Jabal.
Another morning of explosions across Iran, this one during rush hour in the central city of Isfahan. Provincial headquarters of the Ministry of Defense was struck by Israel. Plumes of smoke are rising from oil facilities in Shiraz and the capital, Tehran. It's day 3 of Israel's attacks. And Iran's top diplomat is warning of further retaliation if Israel doesn't stop.
It is a response to the Israeli attacks and violations. Once these attacks stop, we will reciprocate. We were engaged in rounds of negotiations with the US. The 6th round of talks was supposed to be held in Oman. The Zionist entity is not willing to see us reaching an agreement or a diplomatic solution with the United States.
Overnight, Iran struck Israel with multiple waves of missiles and drones. There were several direct hits on the cities of Haifa and Tel Aviv. Israeli citizens were told to seek shelter through the night as Iran and Yemen responded to Israel's attacks. Israel's advanced air defense systems could not stop all the rockets and missiles. Many in Iran support the government's retaliatory strikes.
They used to call us terrorists. So what? Now even America and Britain should fear us. Let them be scared.
We are not really scared. We are more worried for our children. We belong to a generation of war. We are not scared of such incidents.
On Saturday, Israel launched more attacks targeting Iran's critical energy infrastructure. As night fell, an oil depot near the capital, Tehran, was hit and caught fire. Satellite images revealed the impact of Israel's earlier strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. As missiles continue to land in both countries, calls by international leaders for calm have not been able to halt the conflict. Osama bin Jabal, Al Jazeera.
Right, well, let's go live to Tehran and speak to Tahed Asadi. Tahed, what's the latest in terms of the strikes, the extent of damage, not just in Tehran, but across the country?
Well, actually, escalation has ramped up to an unprecedented level of confrontation directly between Iran and Israel. And on that basis, I can say that across the country, so far we have received reports about different targets being hit in different cities of the country. From the early morning, we received targets being hit in Isfahan, a military base that belongs to the Ministry of Defense, something that we are expecting some casualties from which. And also we received reports about strikes in Shiraz and other cities of Iranian cities indeed. But still speaking of the capital, a few hours ago we saw a new round of Israeli strikes into the town, and in the northern part, in the western part, and in the eastern part, we saw explosion sounds, some of them very massive, being heard across the city, and then later it resulted in smoke coming and pouring into the air as a result of that. But also in the downtown, we have reports about explosions happening in Talevani Street and Valley Astor Square. These are critically important locations because they are near very important government buildings, and that means that in downtown there are also strikes taking place. Also in the southern parts of Tehran, from the early morning, we are seeing heavy smoke, thick smoke pouring into the air, which is the result of a target of a fuel depot being targeted by the Israeli strike, which took place at the very early hours of morning. But right now, if you look at the skies in the southern parts of Tehran, you will see this towering cloud of smoke that emerges behind the skies, and this is what we have so far in terms of the realities on the ground. But speaking of the statements that we have heard from Iranian officials, so far we had Masoud Pezeshkian, the Iranian president, who came out to talk about this development, saying that Iran is going to respond, Iran is going to strike back if Israelis decide to go on, and next time Iran's response is going to be more decisive and stronger. But the reality on the ground is that Israeli, let's say, strikes are continuing. So we might be, based on this statements, we might be expecting next round of Iran's retaliatory actions. Also, Iranian president criticized the United States for giving a green light to the Israelis to go on with these strikes, as well as the Western countries, some of them providing equipment, military equipment that are used through the trajectory of these strikes targeting Iranian different locations. And we have to keep in mind that, speaking of the sentiments among the people, we see a huge amount of anger among the people, basically knowing the fact that first it was sort of said that these are just military targets, these are just nuclear sites and facilities under attack. But right now, as we move forward, we see more and more casualties, civilian casualties, as a result of these strikes. We saw several buildings at different scenes where I was, and I saw them in person, that these are buildings that belong and they house very ordinary citizens. For instance, I can refer to one building that belonged to university professors, in which this top nuclear scientist, Dr. Tehran, was killed alongside with his family, as well as a number of civilians who lost their lives in one of these. In another case, we saw a report of at least 20 children being killed as a result of these strikes. And now what we see is a sort of increasing confrontation between the two sides in Tehran. Time and again, we hear the sounds of the air defense system intercepting flying objects, and also we receive similar reports when it comes to the border cities of the country. But still, we are closely following the developments to see what takes place in the next few hours.
Okay, and as you're closely following those developments, Tahad, you were just talking about the number of civilian casualties. What are people doing for shelter? Because when you see the images coming out of Israel, they have loads of bomb shelters dotted across the country. What's the situation for Iranians in Iran, and have they received any instructions from the authorities on what to do?
Well, compared to the Israeli territories, which are experiencing sort of similar situations, for Iran's case, we have to keep in mind that from the last war that just initiated and finished dates back to 1988. It was the Iran-Iraq war. Since then, for a couple of decades, Iran has not experienced war to this extent. Of course, we have to keep in mind that we had a similar strike earlier in 2024 October, but in terms of its extent, it could be called nothing. Now a real war is taking place. It was the Iranian spokesperson for the government, Fatemeh Mohajerani, coming out today and saying that the metro stations, the schools and the mosques are going to be ready to host people, but part of these facilities, including mosques and actually schools, they do not seem safe enough to be used as a sort of shelter. But still, what we hear is that they are preparing some facilities, some stuff to deal with that concern. We don't have specific details on this, but it goes without saying that it might be some infrastructures for that purpose. For the time being, we're waiting to see what next instructions are going to come out in this regard.
Okay, we're just going to see some, don't go away because we're just looking at some pictures, it seems that we've seen of Mashed. It seems there's been an explosion there. The details are still not quite clear yet. Those are the live pictures that you can see there. That looks like an explosion of some sort. Tohed, are you getting any information on that? And what more do we know about Mashed?
For Mashhad, we just had this breaking news that there is a developing story. Further details are not coming out, but it is also important to pay attention that this is one of the first times that among the cities located in the actually eastern part, because most of the cities that were experiencing being targeted were located in the actually western part of the country, or those are the cities like Natanz, which hosted nuclear facilities of the country, which were targeted. But now it seems that a next round of attacks, the next round of strikes are moving towards the eastern part of the country, and that is going to make the scenario even further dangerous. For that specific incident, I'll have to take a look and I'll update you as soon as anything else comes out.
Okay, thank you very much for that update to Tohed Asadi there in Tehran, as the events are moving very fast there. Now let's turn to Noor Odey in the Jordanian capital Amman, and she's reporting from there because the Israeli government has banned Al Jazeera from reporting not just inside of Israel but also the occupied territories. Now, Noor, obviously we've been hearing more sirens, more people running for shelters.
This is the one
Israel.
who
What's
helps
the
everyone stay
there
safe.
in terms of the casualties
An
and also
unsung
the
hero in
damage
a
that
building.
we're seeing?
Well, Sarah, the damage is really quite extensive, and the sirens went off also this afternoon briefly in northern Israel. The Israeli army says that that incident has now been resolved. There were no hits or injuries reported, but overnight we saw strikes on Haifa, where the Israeli Navy is, where the pipelines for oil refineries and for the gas reservoirs are, and they sustained damage. Near Haifa and Tamra, Palestinian-Israeli town, 4 women for the same family were killed because there are no shelters in Tamra, just like other Palestinian-Israeli towns. Bat Yam, however, a district of Tel Aviv, sustained the heaviest damage. More than 60 buildings were destroyed. Many of them have been condemned for demolition because they are beyond repair, and rescue workers continue to go through the rubble to look for any survivors or casualties, prompting the really the top echelon of Israeli politics to come to Bat Yam and visit the Israeli president and prime minister and opposition leaders and cabinet members, all of them promising that they will strike Iran hard, that they will not allow Iran to strike at Israeli towns and residential areas. And of course, that rhetoric really just indicating the kind of mood, the kind of tone the Israeli government is maintaining about this confrontation with Iran.
Okay, and Noor, are we hearing much from the Israeli leadership at the moment?
The Israeli leadership is very defiant. There is no talk of dialogue, of opening a path even to dialogue. We've heard statement after another today from the prime minister down to cabinet members and even some members of the opposition saying that Israel must degrade and eliminate not just Iran's nuclear facilities and capabilities, but also its ballistic missile capabilities, its weapon manufacturing, its air defense systems. There's almost an obsession in terms of the narrative about clearing the way to Tehran in terms of the airspace so that the Israeli fighter jets would have free reign over the skies. And the message from the Israeli leaders is that in order to prevent Iranian strikes from hitting Israeli cities, Israel must continue to escalate its strikes. We have to, it's almost as if, one forgets that there were no strikes on Israeli towns before Friday when Israel began all of this. But at the moment, the Israeli narrative is we must strike at all of the Iranian bombs and missiles in order to prevent them from retaliating against the strikes that are nonstop against all sorts of targets across Iran.
Okay, thank you very much, Noor Adai there. Now let's go live to Rosalind Jordan, who joins us in Washington, D.C. Rosalind, Donald Trump posting once again on Truth Social. What's he been saying?
Well, the U.S. President Donald Trump did say on his Truth Social media platform on Sunday that there will be some sort of deal between Israel and Iran, and that the Trump administration is involved in trying to carry out the diplomacy that could make that happen. But what those details are, the administration is not saying publicly. The U.S. was supposed to meet with Iran in Oman on Sunday for a sixth round of talks about Iran's nuclear program. Obviously, Iran's airstrikes on Friday made the Iranians decide to cancel the meeting. The U.S. Did say in response to the cancellation that it is hopeful that these negotiations can resume. And as we saw from Donald Trump's Truth Social posting on Sunday, that belief is still that of the administration.
And Rosalind, does there seem to be any voices within the Trump administration that's asking the president to not get involved in yet another conflict? Because when Trump came into power, that was one of his promises, that he would bring more peace to the world, in his own words.
Well, certainly the president himself removed his national security advisor because Michael Waltz was seen to be as someone who was itching for a fight, to use the expression, with Iran, and allegedly had been talking with the Israeli prime minister and others in the Israeli government about how to put more pressure on Iran to stop its nuclear program from turning into a nuclear weapons development program. When the president found out about these secret talks, the president fired Mr. Waltz. Now, this is also a question of whether there would be any public support for getting involved in another conflict, given that Trump campaigned on not doing so. There does not appear to be any public interest, although there is the sentiment that if the Iranians were to try to strike U.S. military targets, that the U.S. has the right to self-defense.
Okay, thank you very much for the update. That's the view there from the US. And now let's take a look at what Israel has targeted until now. Now, on day one, Israel assassinated some of Iran's top military brass, including the chief of the Revolutionary Guard. Israel has also killed several Iranian nuclear scientists during its attacks on the country. Nuclear sites have also been targeted. In fact, it's hit Natanz and Fardal. Those are two facilities buried deep underground, as well as the Isfahan facility. Now, the UN watchdog has so far said that no high-level radiation has been detected, but there's been widespread attacks in several other sites. Israel has struck military bases as well as residential areas. Apartment buildings in the capital, Tehran, have faced a great level of damage. And then on Saturday, it began targeting Iran's critical energy infrastructure. It struck a gas refinery in the port city of Kangan, forcing it to temporarily scale back production, and later an oil depot in Tehran, one of the largest storage and distribution hubs in the country. Now, Ali Akbar Darani is a researcher with the Center for Strategic Studies, joining us live now from Tehran. Thanks very much for your time. Israel has clearly had this plan in the making for some time now, but now that a few days have unfolded, is the picture any clearer for you on what's Israel's aims here?
It's now very clear that the Israeli war of aggression against Iran has nothing to do with Iran's nuclear program. They are using Iran's nuclear program as a pretext to wage a war, and their aim is regime change and topple the ruling system, hoping that their actions will lead to some Iranians protesting in the streets, and that the ruling system is going to collapse from within. That is a big, huge miscalculation. It has not happened. It's not going to happen. It has become very clear that Netanyahu is the Adolf Hitler of the 21st century, and he has sold war to the Trump administration without logistical support from the US, without diplomatic, intelligence support, and military support from the US. Israel would have never been able to carry out such an attack against Iran. But Iran is now pretty determined to make sure that Israel will pay a price. This is so simple. If Israel does not pay a very heavy price, it will not stop. So Iran has to make Israel to change its calculations and stop this aggression. And the only way is to inflict unbearable pain on Israel. Now that Israel has attacked Iran's economic infrastructure, oil refineries, Iran has no option but to retaliate. And Israel has few key economic infrastructures. If they are destroyed, Israel will go into darkness, and Iran is pretty sure to do that.
And that's obviously the biggest concern there, is what happens next and what will Israel be targeting. But these latest explosions that we've been seeing are the most central so far in Tehran. We're talking about close to government buildings, including parliament. How worried are you and other Iranians as these attacks seem to be inching even closer? Because these explosions are in a capital which is home to 15 million people.
Iran suffered an intelligence setback only because Israel was able to smuggle mini drones and ammunition into Iran, and now infiltrators are using those mini drones in a dirty terrorist technique against civilian areas, against residential areas, to create chaos. This is part of their coordinated plan to create chaos in Iran. Iran has made good progress in cracking down, but still there is a way to go. Iran is out of shock. There is now a clear plan to retaliate in kind and make sure that the Israeli plan is going to fail. This war is going to backfire. They are not going to achieve their goals.
Now, Iran's president says that if Israel's hostile actions continue, Tehran's responses will also be more, in his words, decisive and severe. What do you think that could look like? What does it mean? Because it's very clear that there's a dangerous escalation here.
Now it has become very clear that the Americans had no real intention of making a deal with Iran. Iran was honest. Iran was open to negotiations for a deal. And that deal was Iran will accept limitations in its uranium enrichment program. And for the lifting of sanctions, there will be no weaponization, and we have a deal. This is what the Americans talked about at the very beginning. Their red line was weaponization, but they changed their position into zero enrichment, and that is the Israeli agenda for war. So there is no way that Iran can give in to American demands, or Iran is not going to capitulate. So President Trump burned his chance for a deal. And Iran is now determined to remain defiant, defend itself, and Iran will do a lot more in the days to come in self-defense. Israelis will be surprised based on my information that Iran is planning to do.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ali Akbar Darini, researcher with the Center for Strategic Studies.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said Iran will pay a very heavy price after at least 6 people, including 2 children, were killed in a missile attack on Bat Yam near Tel Aviv.
Our soldiers, our pilots are over the Iranian skies. Iran will pay a heavy price for the international killing of civilians, women and children, We will both achieve our goals and strike them. We will deliver a crushing blow. They will feel our might.
Right, well, let's go to Meron Rapaport, an editor and writer at Local Call, an Israeli news site, and he joins us live now from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Mr. Meron, for your time. Now, what's the situation where you are after these missiles that we've just been seeing, and how is the public reacting to all of this in general?
The atmosphere in Tel Aviv and central Israel, generally speaking, is quite tense. There's very little traffic in the roads. People are not really going out. Most of the shops are closed, although it's Sunday, it's the beginning of the working week. Yes, these scenes that we have seen this night in Bat Yam and before that in Ramat Gan and in Tel Aviv itself are quite impressive, and people are quite shocked. It doesn't mean that they don't support the Israeli attack. I think there's still a large support for that. I haven't seen a poll done since the beginning, but I would imagine that the support is quite high.
So the support is there, and of course the situation has been very tense for Israelis, even though they do have the Iron Dome and multi-layers of protection when it comes to air defense, but the majority have always been intercepted by the Iron Dome. However, this time the situation has been different. So does that mean that there are pitfalls? It seems that Israelis are quite surprised that that many have been able to get through.
I think although the military is trying to portray that this is expected and this is quite not out of what they imagined before, I think Israelis are quite surprised that so many missiles do hit targets in Israel and in big cities. And of course that the damage is so huge that entire buildings collapsed. I think this is something that Israelis did not really expect. We Israelis were quite used to the rockets fired from Gaza, which did not do a lot of damage, and even those fired from Lebanon by Hezbollah, they were a big nuisance, but did not make such a damage.
And Mr. Meron Rapaport, I just wanted to ask you now, the Israeli spokesperson has said that the goal isn't regime change in Iran, contradicting, it seems, what the Prime Minister had said a few days ago. And this is something in his messages that he's made very clear time and time again, that he is hoping that people there would uprise against the current leadership.
Yes, I think the underline is regime change because it's very hard to see what are the real exit plan of Israel from this attack. If it is meant for a new deal between Iran and the US, well, the chances are quite slim, and anyhow, such a deal will leave the Iranian regime intact, and even with some guarantees from the US and the sanction lifted. This is something that Netanyahu opposed for many, many years. Then there is hoping that Iran will renounce its nuclear program just out of this bombing. This is also not very likely. So I think, yes, I think this is behind the idea of this mass.
I just wanted to mention these pictures that we're just seeing. Sorry to interrupt you there, but we're seeing a picture. It's on a loop at the moment, but a big explosion that just happened. They're the latest pictures. They're not live just now, but it's just the latest pictures close to Tel Aviv. Iran has said that it will also hit back if Israel hits its oil fields. They want to do the same. If it hits its fueling stations, they want to do the same. I'm guessing that's the fear now in Israel, is that it's not just residential areas, it's also some of the energy sector.
Yes, yesterday there was a hit in Haifa in a refinery. We have seen also hits in other strategic places in Israel. Yes, it's not only residential areas that are being hit. There are also strategic targets that were hit. We don't know about everything because the censorship is quite hard, and even if we do know, we are not allowed to say it. But yes, strategic targets are being hit. And I think the big question here for Israel is if this war does go on for weeks or even months, then the endurance of Israel will be put in test. Israel is quite small. There's one airport, there are two ports, naval ports. The economy could be completely paralyzed. Israel is very dependent on the external relations. It will be hard for it to go on for this for months. It has to make Iran surrender quickly or reach a new deal with the US.
Is a new deal even possible? I mean, Trump seems to think so, but Iran doesn't.
Yes, I think this is, of course, out of my expertise, but yes, it does seem that for the moment the attack made a deal less possible, but eventually I don't see any other thing any other way that will end this war. Iran will not surrender. A regime change may happen, but not in the very near future. And Israel, of course, will not surrender. So I don't see any other way out.
At Timberland Bank, we know that succeeding in business is a climb. It takes stamina and a solid map of your...
What kind of deal, if Israel will accept it, and how it will be perceived inside Israel.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Maron Rappaport, editor and writer at Local Wall, an Israeli news site. Now, I just want to bring some of the latest pictures that we're just seeing there. That actually isn't Israel, it's actually in Iran. There's been a major explosion there. Still not clear. We're doing a reloop of that same picture there, but it's still not clear what the circumstances are of this latest attack, and we'll bring you more information as we do. Now, it's just past 15:30 GMT hours, and if you're joining us live, Israel and Iran are trading fire for the third day. Israel and Iran are both threatening escalation. The two countries have been attacking each other with waves of missiles as hostilities continue for this third day. Israeli strikes on Iran have killed more than 110 people, including women and children. The Israeli military says it's attacked an Iranian aircraft at an airport in Mashhad. The army says it struck a refueling plane and has described it as the most long-range strike since the start of its attacks. Mashhad is the second most populous city in Iran, and it's also in the country's northeast. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed Iran will pay a heavy price for killing Israeli civilians in overnight strikes. At least 14 people have been killed in Israel since Friday. US President Donald Trump says it's possible Washington could get involved in the conflict. Now, there's mounting concern that these attacks between Iran and Israel could turn into a wider regional conflict. As that threat looms, our defense editor Alex Katopoulos takes a closer look at the military might of both countries.
This phase of the conflict between Israel and Iran is being fought with specific weapons. Israel's main offensive capability is its air force of 340 combat-capable aircraft, made up of advanced F-15 and F-16 fighter planes and at least 45 F-35 stealth jets. Aircraft firing air-launched missiles and dropping bunker-buster bombs have been the main weapons used. Israel says its special forces teams within Iran have also been launching explosive drones at targets, aiming to kill senior military leaders and other key figures and destroy air defense sites. Iran also has a missile and drone force. Despite dozens of drones being launched, they're easily being shot down by Israel's air defenses and squadrons of jets. But its missile force is large and powerful. Long-range cruise missiles like the Pave and Sumar have ranges up to 2,500 kilometers, can fly under radar cover. A large supply of modern solid-fueled missiles like the Sajil-2 means that they can be launched within minutes, making interception by Israeli fighter jets less likely. Although they're limited in number, Iran's hypersonic missiles like the Fateh-1 and Fateh-2 can travel up to 15 times the speed of sound. That's 18,500 kilometers an hour. These missiles are the most likely to penetrate Israel's powerful air defense network. Israel said that the strikes are ongoing and they will not allow Iran to have the ability to make a nuclear weapon. But what hasn't been mentioned so far is Israel's own arsenal of at least 90 nuclear weapons and the long-range Jericho-3 ballistic missiles that would deliver them.
Right, well, Doug Bandow is a senior fellow at the Cato Institute, and he joins us live now from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much. Trump says Iran and Israel now will have peace soon. How is that possible? What sort of game plan do you think he has?
Well, I hope it's not the same game plan he had for settling the Ukraine-Russia conflict in 24 hours. I don't see an easy solution here. Both sides have to back away. Iran is not going to surrender. Israel doesn't want to acknowledge that it's failed in its desire to destroy the nuclear program. Both of them could keep fighting each other for quite some time.
I mean, as you said, Israel doesn't want to show that it's failing in destroying this nuclear program, but the question has been raised, is it even possible? My understanding is that it needs specific bunker bombs, which the US mostly has. Would that be taking it a step too far by hitting Fordow?
Well, I think Israel would like to draw the U.S. in for that purpose. It's long been believed that only the United States could try to reach the deepest of the facilities that Iran has. But that would be a dramatic step, probably too far for President Trump. You know, he has criticized endless wars in the Middle East. He criticized President Bush over the Iraq debacle. Much of his own base does not want to see a war there. Even some of the hawks want to focus on Asia, not the Middle East. And I suspect he understands that to step into that war will draw attention away from domestic policy issues that he wants to focus on. So this is a very difficult choice for the Trump administration.
Do you think that the rest of the Trump administration is in line with that? And also, how do you think it would be perceived by the American public if it was to get involved?
Well, all the polls indicate that the American public leans towards Israel and kind of wanting them to defend themselves, but that a majority of Americans want nothing to do with entering that war. The American people really are tired of fighting wars in the Middle East. They don't think it's in America's interest. I think his administration is also split. He has people in that administration who lean very strongly towards Israel and probably would like to get involved to help Israel. But he also has a number of people who are much more skeptical, and it's believed that that skepticism is why he replaced his first national security advisor, Mike Waltz, who was viewed as a bit too hot.
Mr. Doug Bandow, I wanted to ask you, Iran's foreign minister accuses Israel of starting the conflict to prevent a nuclear deal between Tehran and the US. What do you make of that? Because it also says that there's not going to be talks for now.
Well, the timing is certainly very suspicious. That is that there were still discussions going on between the United States and Iran. The possibility of a negotiated settlement was there. And Iran had not taken any steps irrevocably towards nuclear weapons. So by starting the war, Israel has made it very difficult for Iran to come back to negotiations. It would be perceived as a surrender. So I think that was probably one of the objectives, at least in the timing of the Israeli action.
Okay. Mr. Doug Bandow, thank you very much for your time, Senior Fellow at the Cato Institute.
Thank you.
And Israeli strike has hit a residential area in central Gaza. Palestinians desperately ran for cover in Gaza's Burej refugee camp following the attack on Sunday. The strike has injured several people and damaged much of the area's infrastructure. Civilians in the Burej refugee camp have been repeatedly targeted by Israeli forces
any type
in the
of
last
eyebrow,
few days.
this is an essential.
At
I almost
least
gave up
52
actually trying to find a
Palestinians have
product.
been killed so far. 17 of them were trying to collect food. Hunger is driving people to aid distribution points, but Israeli gunfire is pushing many of them back. Access to food and water is limited across the strip, and much of the remaining food distribution is carried out by the US and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which has been accused of weaponizing aid. Well, Hind Khodri is live for us in Deir al-Balah. Hind, that death toll still rising. Can you tell us more about this recent attack? And also, there had been a blackout in the north. Is that still the case?
Well, the latest attack was in Nusayrat refugee camp, and it was on a family, Al-Ghurab family, where at least 12 Palestinians have been killed. We're talking about dozens of others have been injured, and there are still many Palestinians still trapped under the rubble. Now, according to rescue teams, they're saying that they believe that there are survivors still under the debris, and they are trying their best to rescue as much Palestinians as possible. What we know so far is this was a house that had a lot of Palestinians that were seeking refuge and were displaced in this house. But this was not the only attack in Nusayrat in the past couple of hours. There has been also an attack on one of the graveyards in Nusayrat. There has been a couple of airstrikes in Al-Maghazi and Al-Burej, and since the early hours of the morning there has been also attacks in the northern Gaza Strip and also in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip in Khan Yunis. But it's not only the targeting of residential houses, public spaces and makeshift shelters where Palestinians are seeking refuge, but also the Israeli forces are opening fire on Palestinians that are seeking for aid very close to distribution points by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, and this is a US and Israel-backed humanitarian foundation that is the only foundation and aid organization that is actually distributing aid on Palestinians. So far, since the morning, 17 Palestinians were shot as they were trying to reach those distribution points, and this is not the first time this happens. It happened since the first day these distribution points happened. But what's different today is they are 3 different distribution points, one in the south, one in the middle area, and the other one is in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. Talking to Palestinians, why are you going there despite the fact that you know that you may be shot or injured? They're saying that this is the only way they can get food, and this is the only way they could feed their families. We have been also talking to Palestinians that were injured during these distribution points, women, children that were also trying to seek food, and they are saying that the Israeli forces are not only using live ammunition, but they're also using explosives from quadcopters, and they're also using artillery shelling. As the sun sets every single day, Palestinians starts gathering, waiting for these distribution points to open. But according to Palestinians, the number of food that is offered is very little, and also the opening hours for these distribution points is very, very short, which is according to them 2 hours maximum. So Palestinians do not have the ability to reach the area and go back, and they're saying that it's very, very dangerous as a live ammunition and open fire happens every single day, but they do not have any other option than risking their lives to feed their families.
Okay, thank you very much, Hind. A very harrowing time for Palestinians still in the Gaza Strip. Now, let's return to our top story, because Israel and Iran are both threatening escalation. The 2 countries have been attacking each other with waves of missiles. Israeli strikes on Iran have killed more than 110 people, including women and children. The Israeli military says it's attacked an Iranian aircraft at an airport in Mashhad. The army says it struck a refueling plane and has described it as the most long-range strike since the start of its attacks. Mashhad is the 2nd most populous city in Iran and is in the country's northeast. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed Iran will pay a heavy price for killing Israeli civilians in overnight strikes. At least 14 people have been killed in Israel since Friday. US President Donald Trump says it's possible that Washington could get involved in the conflict. Now, Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian has warned of, quote, more decisive and severe retaliation if Israel continues its attacks. Now, while Foreign Minister and the chief nuclear negotiator Abbas Araghchi says Tehran is acting in self-defense and will de-escalate as soon as Israel stops its airstrikes. He says Israel attacked Iran to prevent a nuclear agreement with the US.
It is a response to the Israeli attacks. It is a response to the Israeli violation. Once these attacks come to a stop, we will naturally reciprocate. We were engaged in rounds of negotiations with the United States of America. The 6th round of talks were supposed to be held in Oman, and we were supposed to present a counter proposal on tomorrow's meeting. Our proposal could have opened doors for an all-out agreement with the Americans. The Zionist entity is not willing to see us reaching an agreement or a diplomatic solution with the United States.
Right, well, Ali Hashim, our correspondent, joined us here in the studio. Ali, we just heard there from the Iranian president and also from the Iranian foreign minister. On one hand, they're saying that they will carry out severe attacks in the same way, responding to Israel's attacks, but also saying that they are ready to de-escalate if Israel stops. Is there a contradiction there?
Well, so the idea here is that the Iranians did not initiate this war. They didn't start it. And they were preparing to attend the 6th round of negotiations with the United States. So on one side, they are in a position to retaliate whenever they're being attacked. At least this is the government stance from the beginning. Anytime we are attacked, we are going to retaliate. And they are trying to use this retaliation as a proof of power. They're kind of showcasing their capabilities with respect to rockets, drones, etc. At the same time, it's their interest to de-escalate. It's their interest to end this, let me say, episode, because this is a war. This is the first Iranian-Israeli war. So for now, whatever the result of this war, however this is going to end, it's going to be named the first Iranian-Israeli war.
And it's the war that many have dreaded, especially across the region. No one could have predicted the way things have unfolded in the last year. There's a real concern, especially with the GCC and the proximity of these countries to Iran, but also Iran saying that it could target US bases and US assets in the region if it had to.
Well, the Iranians are always linking this to the US being part of the campaign against Iran. But with the foreign minister, with the president, with all these signals towards diplomacy, that they are ready to also to take the diplomacy path, this also gives the United States a chance to exploit this intention and probably reach to a compromise. However, what is this compromise? The gap is big. I mean, if we go back to what the Iranians wanted and what they offered and what the Americans wanted, there was a huge gap that even the Qataris or the Omanis or any other mediators weren't able to bridge.
But when you've been covering Iran for so long, and when you look at the situation with Iran and the tensions there have been with the US, and now it seems that Trump keeps talking about this, Iran has to accept a deal perhaps when it comes to the nuclear situation, but what does Trump gain out of that deal, if there was ever to be one?
Well, the issue here also is a bit complicated, with Prime Minister Netanyahu having a kind of an agenda that's different from President Trump's agenda. President Trump isn't after, at least this is what he's been saying, he's not after regime change in Iran. Prime Minister Netanyahu is after regime change in Iran. And this is where
But interesting, that's despite the Israeli spokesperson saying that isn't the aim goal, but that seems to be the case because...
Well, the accumulation of attacks, the kind of attacks the geographical extension of the attacks says, and plus Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech, him addressing the Iranian people, calling on them to revolt against the regime.
It's a direct message, isn't it?
And in parallel, we're seeing the former crown prince addressing people and calling on them to revolt and at the time of war. So it seems that we've seen Crown Prince Pahlavi visiting Israel on several occasions, Prime Minister Netanyahu meeting him on several. They have a very good and strong relationship. So what's clear is that there's an attempt to create a vacuum in Tehran and get someone to fill that vacuum. And it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu has his own candidate for that.
Okay, it seems so. Thank you very much, Ali Hashem, for looking at the overview of what is happening with this conflict. Now, on Saturday, Iran launched a barrage of ballistic missiles towards Israel. One of them fell on the city of Tamra, killing at least 4 Palestinian Israelis. This video... Right, well, this video that has been circulating online is showing a Jewish family cheering on as Iranian missiles fell on Palestinian homes. Now, those killed have been identified as 4 women from the same family. They included a mother and her 2 daughters. Now, Palestinian Israelis make up approximately 21% of Israel's population. That's roughly 2.1 million people. There are almost no shelters in Palestinian Israeli towns and neighborhoods, even though buildings constructed in Israel since the 1990s are required to include safe rooms. Palestinians say there are also fewer Iron Dome interceptions over those towns and areas. Well, let's speak to Sami Abu Shahadeh, and he's a former member of the Knesset. He's also currently leader of Balad, that's a left-wing Palestinian nationalist party, joining us live now from Jaffa in Israel. Thank you very much. So as we've seen then, this is something that we've seen throughout, not just this current escalation of events, but also when the war on Gaza was happening, when it came to rockets and those being fired from Lebanon. Palestinian Israelis not being protected, and some of those towns. Tell us more about that.
Good evening, Sarah. Thank you very much for this interview. What's happening is that we are living in a state which is dealing with us as enemies, not as citizens. Not just the fascist Israeli government led by Benjamin Netanyahu and Ben Gvir, who has been inciting against us for a very, very long time, much before the 7th of October. But the whole system is built in a way that it separates between the Jewish population and the Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel in all fields of life. And in a lot of these fields, they deal with us as enemies, not as citizens. And if you had seen, God forbid, that from the Arab population, you would be seeing people celebrating the death of the Jewish people by Iranian missiles. You would see them in jail after a few minutes. The Israeli police would not allow such incitement and such hatred and racism towards the Jewish population. But they do allow it towards the Palestinian population.
And can you explain to us about the situation with the Iron Dome? We know those are dotted across Israel. As I'd mentioned earlier, they're not in all areas. Which areas have been neglected, and what's being done in terms of the communities? Because they have been asking for a very long time for that protection. What's the response been from the Israeli authorities?
First of all, there are hundreds of thousands of Arab Palestinians who are not defended at all by any of the Israeli defending systems, like more than 150,000 of the Bedouin community who lives in the Naqab Desert. All their Jewish neighbors are being defended by the different defending systems, but we have something like 150,000 people, Sarah, who lives in the desert. Israel calls their areas unrecognized villages. On the Israeli maps, they do not exist at all. We are talking about 150,000 people. These people are totally left for any kind of attack from Gaza or from Yemen or from Iran, from anywhere. Israel do not see that its duty is to defend these citizens. Now, we have a few hundred other thousands who are spread all over the state, but Israel did not allow them to build. And they don't have licenses, official licenses from the Israeli state to build on their land. Okay, so they don't have a place that they can defend themselves. The Israeli state did not build them areas where they can defend themselves the way it did all over the state for the Jewish population. There isn't one Jewish community or Jewish area within the state of Israel which is not being defended. But you have this phenomena only in the Arab area, Sarah, because the state from the beginning do not deal with us as equal citizens.
The inequality
They see us as
So the inequality is not just there, but also
it has been happening much before the 7th of October.
Yeah, and the equality there is also in the occupied territories, which includes occupied East Jerusalem and occupied West Bank. Mr. Sami Abu Shahadeh, former member of the Knesset and current leader of Balad, that's a left-wing Palestinian National Party. Thank you very much for joining us from Jaffa in Israel. Right, well, that's it from me, Sarah Khairat, at least for this news hour. But I will be back in a moment with more of everything of what's been happening, the Israeli and Iranian strikes against each other, and the response from the US as well as regional leaders. Will be looking at those latest pictures as well. Israel has said it's attacked Mashhad airport in eastern Iran.
The film industry in India's Kerala is booming, but behind the scenes, a dark truth unfolds.
Slowly, he started touching my hand and the whole thing was happened after.
101 East investigates revelations of violent sexual harassment and meets the women speaking out, breaking the silence on Al Jazeera.
Investigating the use and abuse of power across the globe on Al Jazeera.
I have the right to boycott anyone I want to, and the state has no business getting involved in that.
I was just opening my annual contract from the state of Arizona, and I was rather shocked to see this.
A three-part series explores the implications of U.S. anti-boycott laws for freedom of speech and First Amendment rights.
God's chosen to bless us because we protect Israel.